Eccoci qua. Allora, buongiorno, la seduta è aperta. Do il benvenuto al Consiglio e Commissione. Il primo punto all'ordine del giorno reca le dichiarazioni sul recesso del Regno Unito dall'Unione Europea. Darei subito la parola al Ministro Tuppurainen a nome del Consiglio. Prego, a lei la parola.
Honourable Mr. President, honourable members, we have once more gathered to discuss the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. It is an unfortunate situation and many citizens and businesses continue to suffer from the uncertainty caused by Brexit. In July, the UK got a new government and a new Prime Minister. Unfortunately, it is increasingly clear that this has not helped to clarify the situation or the UK's negotiation position. When it comes to the most difficult questions, such as the Irish border, the UK has not tabled any new concrete proposals yet. Furthermore, opinions in the Parliament in London remain divided. Only the firm rejection of a no-deal Brexit has been able to attract the majority. Still, the UK government is insisting on its red lines. As the deadline of October 31st is fast approaching, we are faced with more rather than less uncertainty. This rather bleak situation should, however, not distract us from our priority, which remains an orderly withdrawal to put an end to the uncertainty caused by Brexit. I hope that we can still achieve an orderly Brexit. This is why we have asked the UK to put forward concrete, detailed and operational ideas regarding what appears to be the main stumbling block, namely how to ensure the absence of a hard border on the island of Ireland while respecting the Good Friday Agreement and protecting the integrity of the single market. The latest developments in Westminster and the call for a further extension make it very difficult to predict how things will unfold. We have to acknowledge that, currently, a no deal on 31st October is a quite likely outcome, not at least because the UK government keeps on repeating they are ready to leave without a deal. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, preparedness efforts have to be stepped up and measures finalised quickly at the EU and national level in close cooperation among Member States and with the Commission, building on the last package of measures tabled by the Commission and on those already adopted. These new legislative activities at this early stage of the new institutional cycle will add to an already heavy agenda. We are confident that by working together we can deliver. I am encouraged in this respect by the speed of which our two institutions were able to reach agreement on the previous Brexit-related proposals. The Presidency, with your cooperation, is determined to facilitate the adoption of the last batch of contingency measures in good time. While the point of departure for the future relationship will largely depend on whether the UK decides to leave with or without a deal, we will in any scenario need to address our fundamental priorities with the UK: safeguarding citizens' rights, honouring the UK's financial obligations resulting from its membership of the EU, and providing an assurance to preserve the integrity of the single market, the level playing field and the stability on the island of Ireland. In the meantime, this uncertainty and the tensions it generates are further testing our unity and resolve. It is therefore all the more necessary, on the one hand, to resist the temptation of bilateral deals at sectoral or national level and, on the other hand, to reflect our common purpose in the swift adoption of the necessary contingency measures. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by noting the large degree of convergence that exists between your draft resolution and the priorities of the Council. This is a clear illustration of the commonality of purpose of our two institutions as regards Brexit. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for your attention, and I look forward to this discussion.
Grazie. Grazie al Ministro e adesso la parola al Presidente Juncker, che ringraziamo per la sua presenza in aula. Prego, Presidente.
Buongiorno, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les députés. Je vous remercie de votre invitation. C'est toujours un plaisir pour moi que de pouvoir m'adresser à vous, de parler devant le Parlement et de parler avec le Parlement. Au cours des 5 dernières années, la Commission européenne a toujours pu compter sur la clairvoyance, la coopération et le soutien de votre Assemblée. Cela vaut également pour le travail que nous avons accompli ensemble sur la question du retrait du Royaume-Uni. Et cette Assemblée reste, je le sais, ouverte et elle reste au travail. Michel Barnier et moi-même, nous avons déjeuné lundi avec le Premier ministre Johnson. Vous ne serez pas surpris d'apprendre que le Premier ministre nous a dit que le Royaume-Uni continue de vouloir un accord, mais aussi qu'en tout état de cause, le Royaume-Uni, quittera l'Union européenne le 31 octobre avec ou sans accord, nihil novum sub sole. Cela veut dire que le risque d'un no deal reste très réel. Ce sera peut-être These are my best friends and groupies. Don't be surprised that they are shouting. Cela veut dire, disais-je, que le risque d'un no deal reste très réel. Ce sera peut-être le choix du gouvernement du Royaume-Uni, mais ce ne sera jamais le choix de l'Union européenne. C'est pourquoi je préfère me concentrer sur ce que nous pouvons faire pour parvenir à un accord. Accord que je crois toujours souhaitable et que je crois toujours possible.
Union. And that's why I think it is better now to focus on what we can do in terms of concluding that deal, something which is desirable and still, in my view, possible.
Vous ne serez pas surpris non plus. Vous ne serez pas surpris.
Nor will you be surprised to learn that the main sticking point is the safety net, the backstop, in other words. Now, everybody by now has heard of the backstop, but not everybody understands why the backstop was agreed between the 27 and the UK government. The safety net, or the backstop, is an operational solution to a practical problem, a problem which is caused by Brexit for the island of Ireland and would not have come about if the United Kingdom had not decided to leave the European Union. The backstop is designed to do 3 things. First of all, to avoid a physical hard border on the island of Ireland. Secondly, to safeguard the integrity of the single market and, above all, the place of Ireland in that market. And thirdly, to protect North-South cooperation and the all-Ireland economy, which is absolutely crucial for stability and peace in Ireland and indeed enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. I said to Prime Minister Johnson that I had no emotional attachment to the safety net, to the backstop, but I stated that I stand by the objectives that it is designed to achieve, and that is why I called on the Prime Minister to come forward with operational proposals in writing for practical steps which would allow us to achieve those objectives. Now, until such time as those proposals have been presented, I will not be able to tell you, looking you straight in the eye, that any real progress has been achieved. But what I can tell you is, and this perhaps runs counter to many press articles that have appeared in the UK, I can tell you that the talks we had were friendly, constructive and, in part, positive. The Commission is prepared to work day in, day out, from morning until night, with a few breaks, to try and find the technical and political solutions we need. But I'm not sure we'll get there. There's very little time remaining. But what I do know is that we have to keep trying. I asked the British Prime Minister to spell out the alternative arrangements that he is envisaging, and I said that there should be political negotiations in the positive sense of the term between the UK and the EU, and I will entrust my colleague Michel Barnier, as well as the UK Brexit Minister, to take up and pursue those negotiations so that they don't remain purely at technical level. In July of 2016, the 27 countries concluded that it would be a mistake to focus exclusively on Brexit. We are determined to forge a stronger union of 27 and improve the daily lives of all our citizens in the process. I spoke recently before this Parliament in my State of the Union address, and also to outline my proposals for the future, and all European leaders welcomed the programme in their meeting in Brussels.
The Union have spent 2.5 years negotiating with the UK, looking for ways to organise our divorce. During this time, the European Union has shown great unity of purpose, great solidarity with the member states most affected. This unity is our most precious resource and our greatest asset. It will continue to guide me over the next weeks, and I'm sure it will continue to guide this House also in the future. Thank you for listening.
Grazie Presidente Juncker. Adesso la parola al capo negoziatore Michel Barnier. A lei la parola.
Merci Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à chacune et chacun d'entre vous, Madame la Ministre. Président,
Thank you, President, and good morning, one and all. Madam Minister. Thank you for allowing me, after President Juncker has taken the floor, to add a few things to what he has said very clearly. I'd like particularly to come back in this short statement to two key current points in our ongoing discussions with the British, the question of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and that of the future relationship, which is at least as important because we will need to rebuild a partnership with this great country, a friend, an ally, a neighbour. The UK has been that and will continue to be that in the future. President Juncker reminded us that a fundamental request of the UK government has been the removal of the backstop, or at least its replacement. As you know, the UK and the EU and the UK reached an agreement in November 2018, almost a year ago, on the backstop. It was approved by the 28 heads of government and received full support from your Parliament. Now, why has this subject become such a central issue for all of us? Well, because, and this is no small matter, because it is in Ireland that Brexit creates the most problems. It is in Ireland that it harbours the most risks. It is the only place where the United Kingdom has a land border with the EU. There is a specific policy which, as you know, is linked to an often tragic history. Provisions are enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement, which the UK and Ireland are signatories to and have committed to upholding. So the position from the side of the European Union has never been an ideological one. It has always been a pragmatic one. The backstop provided a kind of safety net, insurance that would allow the preservation under all circumstances of the three requirements which the President of the Commission has recalled this morning. We don't want to go back to a physical border or between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We want to protect the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement fully, and we want to protect the integrity of the single market, our single market. And we want to ensure that the whole island economy, the North-South cooperation provided for in the Good Friday Agreement, and I would recall that the mapping exercise that we undertook together with the UK authorities shows just how much this cooperation between the North and the South has been supported by the EU framework and budget. The UK government, the new UK government in Luxembourg this week outlined the aspects of the backstop which they don't like. That's not enough, however, to move towards achieving a solution. We need a legally operative solution in the withdrawal agreement which fully responds to each one of the problems, which addresses each one of the risks created by Brexit. And this is the objective which we agreed upon clearly with the government of Theresa May. Let me just give you one specific example, which I know very well, because a few years ago I was Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. Any live animal, any product, food product, which comes to Northern Ireland from Great Britain, not only enters onto the island of Ireland, Irish market, but also the Polish, Danish, German and French markets immediately, simply by virtue of being present on the island of Ireland. And therefore, we need to apply controls to protect consumers, ensure food security, food safety, prevent animal health risks. We don't have a short memory, and nor do the consumers of Northern Ireland, the island of Ireland, and the consumers of the rest of the United Kingdom. So, once again, there are, linked to the backstop, specific guarantees which we need, and all the citizens of the island of Ireland need, for peace and stability, for the ongoing daily life and economic activity on the island. And I say that also for the safety of produce, for food safety, the protection of national products. That's what controls also achieve when we're looking at products from beyond the borders of the single market. So that's one specific example. We understand also the remarks of the UK Prime Minister on the democratic or non-democratic nature of the backstop. But it is up to the UK government to ensure the support of the North Island institutions to the withdrawal agreement that would be signed on behalf of all of the UK. And we've already provided for a number of provisions in the withdrawal agreement on the application of the provisions in the implementation of the backstop if it were to be activated. And on this matter, as on others, allow me to echo President Juncker in saying that we are open to any UK proposal and are willing to work day and night towards progress. The other subject, which is of key importance, and I'll close on this point, is that of our shared ambition for the future relationship, what we've called the strategic partnership which we need to build or rebuild together with the UK after Brexit. And that's the objective of the second document alongside the withdrawal agreement, which is the political declaration, which was approved together with the UK in November last year, and which really opens up the path to broad cooperation in the area of economy, police, judiciary, defence and foreign policy. Now, in its economic aspect, it sets us out towards a free trade agreement. But in the existing text, the door is open to a higher ambition, if there is a shared desire in that area. And obviously, we want to be as ambitious as possible in building our future economic relationship with the UK. For example, through a customs union. And this economics relation should be accompanied by guarantees of a level playing field. And here, again, members, I recognise that this is an expression which is somewhat technical, but behind this expression of a level playing field there are human, economic, territorial realities and choices which the UK needs to make to strike the right balance between the right level of regulation and the economic market. The UK government today, and I'd like to emphasise this point, wishes to revisit the commitments made by Theresa May in this area of level playing field. When we're talking about such an important, such a large and such a close country, whose trade is, half of their trade is with us, such a future agreement would require a clear common basis. And in order to make things absolutely clear, we need to state that the level of ambition of a future agreement which we would negotiate with the UK, the level of ambition will clearly depend upon the guarantees that we will have and that we will together have put down on paper: social, environmental, competition guarantees. I wanted to talk about these 2 points as they relate to discussions currently underway with the government of Boris Johnson. We haven't lost the overview of the whole, however. I just wanted to say that since the beginning we've been very much focused on an orderly departure, which is far more valuable than a no-deal situation. I would recommend that nobody underestimate the consequences of a no-deal for the UK first and foremost, obviously, but for us as well, in the absence of an agreement. We want this agreement to protect the rights of 4.5 million European citizens in the UK and British nationals in each one of our EU member states, and the draft agreement secures those rights. We also want to ensure that rights are protected for those who work abroad. So it's very important that everything that was agreed together by 28 is continued with 28. And we want to guarantee peace and stability. It's a long road, but we want to create the conditions which are necessary for confidence to build our future relationship as outlined in the political declaration. If the UK leaves without a deal,
dans l'accord de retrait. Mais s'il n'y a pas d'accord de retrait,
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament,
la
I
question de la sécurité
would
des
recall
citoyens,
that
de la paix
these
en
questions
Irlande,
don't just
de la
disappear.
protection
They
du
have been
marché intérieur
regulated in the
comme
withdrawal
celle,
agreement.
du
They have been
budget.
covered, but they still
Et nous
remain.
devrons les régler,
Whether we're talking about the peace in Ireland,
préalablement
citizens'
à un
rights,
futur partenariat avec le Royaume-Uni.
budgetary issues,
Les conséquences
they will all
du
still
Brexit ne
need
sont pas
to
théoriques. Moi, j'ai
be
souvent entendu dire
settled
ici, dans
prior
cet
to a
hémicycle,
future relationship
qu'elles étaient
with
innombrables et
the
souvent
UK.
sous-estimées sur le plan humain
The
et
consequences
social,
of Brexit
sur
are
le plan
not
financier
theoretical.
et budgétaire, sur le plan juridique
It's often been
et
said that
technique.
they are innumerable and
Ils
often
sont
underestimated
Vous l'avez
in
souvent
terms
rappelé,
of
comme
their
vous le faites à
social and
nouveau
human
dans
impact,
votre
financial and
résolution
budgetary impact, their legal and technical impact.
3 ans après le référendum
They
britannique,
are considerable,
mesdames et messieurs, il ne
and
s'agit
that is something that
certainement
is
pas
covered in your
de faire
resolution today.
semblant de négocier.
Almost 3
Il
years
est dans notre
after
responsabilité
the
de poursuivre ce processus
UK
avec de la
referendum,
détermination,
I don't think
avec de la
that
sincérité.
we should be spending
Nous
time
continuerons de le faire en concertation
pretending
permanente, en toute
to
transparence
negotiate. I
avec les
think
27
we need to
gouvernements
move
au nom
forward
desquels
with
nous
determination.
négocions.
We need
La
to
ministre,
do
je
so
remercie la
with
présidence
ongoing cooperation
actuelle.
and
Nous continuerons de le faire en
transparency,
dialogue et en toute
on
transparence avec
working
votre
on behalf
Brexit
of
Steering
the
Group.
governments
Je
that we
remercie
represent.
et avec l'ensemble
And
des
I'd like
groupes et
to
des
particularly
commissions
thank
de votre
the
Parlement.
current
Ce sera
presidency for
toujours,
their
ça a toujours été, ça
contribution
restera
and the
notre attitude
contribution
dans
of the
cette extraordinaire
Brexit Steering Group and all of the groups and committees of your Parliament. It will always be, has always been, the attitude that has been adopted in these extraordinary complex negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Barnier. We shall now move.
We've been hearing there from the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, and the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker. Michel Barnier said that he was open to any UK proposal regarding the backstop. That's the biggest sticking point. And he said he was willing to work day and night to achieve a deal, and that the backstop was important for the Good Friday Peace Agreement. It was also important for the integrity of the European single market, but he said he still wanted to work towards a deal right to the very last moment, and after Britain leaves the EU, to build on forming a strong strategic relationship with the UK. Jean-Claude Juncker referred to the talks he held earlier this week with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, saying they were friendly and constructive, but he hadn't heard the alternative proposals that Boris Johnson wants to replace the backstop with. Mr. Johnson did not spell them out to him, and Jean-Claude Juncker said in that session to Parliament that the risk of a no-deal Brexit is still very real, but it's down to the UK. If it leaves without a deal, the EU would never opt for a no-deal. We'll be covering more on this story with analysis after the break.
On the table, to the table. And the Parliament where we can discuss the current state of play is the European Parliament. It's not the Commons. Unfortunately, Brexiteers claimed Westminster would take back control, and now they shut it down. Is this the idea of democracy of tomorrow in Great Britain? I have to ask the Brexiteers. Ladies and gentlemen, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, eine grundsätzliche Überlegung geht mir durch den Kopf, die mich bewegt, und zwar die Überlegung, dass das Volk vertreten wird durch den Premierminister und dass der Volkeswille umgesetzt werden muss. Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, 51% ist die Mehrheit und das ist zu respektieren. Aber 51% beim Referendumsausgang ist nicht das gesamte Volk. Das gesamte Volk wird vertreten in einem Parlament, in einem Plenum des Parlaments, wo Interessen ausgeglichen werden. Dort wird das Volk vertreten. Und wenn dann auch noch zusätzlich gesagt wird, ich muss Volkesmeinung durchsetzen gegen das Parlament, dann werden
of the people against the will of the Parliament, you're raising very fundamental questions. And that is indeed questions such as what is your approach to the issues of the current world, and leadership, how are you going to lead it? And leadership means leading together in today's society. And this is one of the things that concerns me hugely about what's going on in Britain. The EPP is clear that it's going to support the resolution. I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to Mr Barnier for his work, also to Guy Verhofstadt for all the work that the Brexit steering group has done with his colleagues. We have a united position. We will accept
dass
to
wir
consider
zu den
an extension
Verabredungen
if we
stehen,
feel
die
that
im
there's a clear
bisherigen Austrittsvertrag
justification and there
fixiert
is
sind,
also a
dass
commitment
dahinter
to the
gute
objectives
Argumente
of the
stehen
withdrawal
und dass wir
agreement.
offen sind
If
auch
there's a
für neue
clearly argued
Vorschläge.
case,
Aber
we are
eines möchte
open
ich
to
als
new
Warnung auch
proposals.
aussprechen,
I'd
bei
like to
allen
reiterate
Diskussionen
that,
über
but I'd
neue
also like to
Vorschläge, die
issue
jetzt
a
diskutiert
warning that
werden,
it's
muss
all very
klar
well to
sein,
talk about
dass die
new
Europäische
proposals,
Union
but we
nicht
have to be
zulassen darf,
crystal
dass
clear
vor unserer
about
Haustüre
what we will
mit den
and
Standards
won't
Europas,
consider,
Sozial- und
and we will not
Umweltstandards,
allow our
Dumping
social
betrieben
and
wird. Das dürfen wir nicht
environmental
zulassen
and
bei all
employment
Diskussionen,
standards to be
die auf uns
undermined. We are
zukommen.
not
Der
an area
Brexit ist
for dumping. Our door
unkalkulierbar
is not
geworden
open to
und deswegen
these
müssen wir uns auch
sorts
auf das
of
Worst-Case-Szenario
developments.
vorbereiten.
We
Und
have,
eines
of
ist
course,
klar,
now to
wenn
recognise
die
that we
britische
have to
Politik
prepare
nicht
for
aus
the
ihrem
worst-case
Deadlock
scenario.
herauskommt,
And
dann
if
ist wohl
British
das Beste,
politics can't
die
emerge
Frage,
from
die ansteht,
deadlock,
wieder
then
zurückzugeben
the
an die
best thing
Menschen,
we can
die
do
Bürger in
is
Großbritannien
give the
sollten über die
vote back
Zukunft
to the
entscheiden.
people of Britain so that they can take a decision. Thank you.
Presidente García Pérez, a lei la parola.
Gracias, presidente. Un Brexit sin acuerdo sería una mala noticia para todos, pero sobre todo supondría un desastre para el Reino Unido. No se trata solo de nuestra opinión. La reciente publicación del informe Yellowhammer por parte del gobierno británico alerta de los peores escenarios de un Brexit sin acuerdo y derrumba la utopía inventada por Boris Johnson. Interrupciones en los pasos del Canal de la Mancha, incremento notable de los precios de la electricidad, reducción del suministro de alimentos y medicinas con un grave impacto para las poblaciones más vulnerables e incertidumbre jurídica para los cientos de miles de ciudadanos británicos que viven en la Unión Europea y para los ciudadanos europeos que viven en Reino Unido. No voy a pretender que determinados diputados cambien su actitud con respecto a esta situación. Lo único que pido es respeto. No soy ingenua, no pido respeto. No soy ingenua, no pido que respeten a esta Cámara, a la que llevan mucho tiempo sin respetar. Pido que respeten al pueblo que dicen representar, porque sus risas se convierten en angustias, en incertidumbres y en preocupaciones de millones de personas que están atentos a este debate.
On the part of millions of people.
En este contexto, las principales fuerzas proeuropeas de esta Cámara manifestamos en esta resolución nuestro firme apoyo a una extensión del artículo 50 para evitar un escenario catastrófico sin acuerdo si el Reino Unido necesita más tiempo para celebrar elecciones generales o un nuevo referéndum. Podrán contar con nuestro apoyo. El responsable del actual caos solo tiene un nombre. El actual responsable del caos tiene un nombre, Boris Johnson. El carácter de un hombre es su destino, decían los griegos, y yo coincido con ellos, afirmó el primer ministro en el factor Churchill, su libro de 2014 sobre el estadista británico. A raíz de los últimos episodios, el destino parece reservar a Boris Johnson la destrucción del hermanamiento histórico entre el Reino Unido y el resto de Europa. Nuestro grupo ha trabajado de manera responsable para mitigar las peores consecuencias del Brexit. Desde esta Cámara, los socialdemócratas exigimos a Boris Johnson y a su gobierno que garanticen los derechos adquiridos de los ciudadanos de la Unión Europea que residen en Reino Unido. Para nosotros es una cuestión fundamental. Estamos profundamente preocupados por las declaraciones confusas, contradictorias del ministro de Interior británico sobre el fin de la circulación después del 31 de octubre. La ciudadanía nunca debe pagar el precio de los errores de sus representantes, tengámoslo muy claro. Nuestra prioridad sigue siendo una salida ordenada. Y para ello, el acuerdo de retirada es el mejor instrumento. Protege los derechos de la ciudadanía, evita una frontera entre la República de Irlanda e Irlanda del Norte, estipula las obligaciones financieras del Reino Unido y protege la integridad del mercado interior. Los socialdemócratas siempre hemos visto el Brexit como un error histórico y estamos dispuestos a apoyar al pueblo británico si decide revertir esta decisión. Bien haría el primer ministro británico en recordar las palabras pronunciadas en Bruselas por el que fuera el héroe de su infancia, Winston Churchill, ante una sesión conjunta del Parlamento belga el 16 de noviembre de 1945. No veo razón por la que no puedan surgir los Estados Unidos de Europa, los cuales unificarán este continente de un modo nunca conocido desde la caída del Imperio Rumano y en el que todos sus pueblos puedan vivir juntos en prosperidad y en paz. Muchas gracias.
Grazie. Onorevole Verhofstadt, a lei la parola. Prego.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's important to recall that the British Parliament may be shut down, but we are clearly showing today with this debate that the European Union is not what is the case in Britain. And it's fantastic that the Brexit Party and Mr Farage are making so much noise because they can't do it in Westminster anymore, so they have to do it here. By the way, they are not even elected in Westminster. So, so you know, dear colleagues, Eurosceptics, they like something. They like, in fact, bashing Europe by saying that the European Union is undemocratic, and you can be sure that in a few moments they're going to repeat that, huh? They're going to repeat that. Well, I can tell you that Jean-Claude Juncker or Tusk can do a lot of things, but at least they cannot close the doors of our house. That is not possible. So if the Eurosceptics, in the coming hours now, in the coming minutes, want to use again for a ridiculous comparison with the Soviet Union, from now on they can point the finger to Westminster instead to Strasbourg or to Brussels. That seems to me the good way forward now for them. Now, my hope is that, President, today, with the vote today of the resolution, we will reiterate our unity about Brexit. A unity that means Parliament, that means the Commission, that means the Council, and that means the 27 Member States. There is no discussion about this. Brexit is bad. It's a bad idea. But it got at least one positive effect. That is to reunite the Europeans and to make the European project, since Brexit, again more popular. That is what we have seen in all the public opinions inside the European Union. In fact, the message of the people during the elections was very clear. Reform Europe. Don't destroy Europe. Don't leave Europe. And that was the case in all our member states. And that was also the case in Britain, because nearly 40 of the 73 elected British MEPs are Remainers today. That brings me, dear colleagues, to the main point. That is the outcome, the deal that is still possible, I think. And we as Parliament in the resolution set in fact three conditions, and I want to recall, President, these three conditions. The first is to safeguard the rights of our citizens, and for the Europeans and for the British alike. And today I have to tell you that is not achieved. There are every day in the British press proposals, examples of people already living 1 decade, even 2 decades in Britain, who cannot have this so-called settled status. So I think we need a fundamental shift in the way the UK government applies at least that part of the withdrawal agreement. What we don't need is a bureaucratic application as it is now. What we need from the British government is an automatic registration of all our EU citizens. And I know, and you know, that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, likes a lot to compare himself with movie characters, as we know. Well, dear colleagues, concerning citizens' rights, instead of playing the angry Hulk, I think he should inspire himself by another character, the caring nanny, the film of Doubtfire, Mrs. Doubtfire, with Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams. Secondly, I want to come now back to the other problem, the Irish backstop. Or let's call it, Michel, something else maybe. If they have a problem with the backstop, we call it safety net. I think that is something that we can certainly agree on. need such a safety net, and that is not only for economic reasons. The main reason why we need a safety net is to make sure that violence is not returning on the island of Ireland. That is the main reason. And I have to tell you that I find it completely irresponsible of a number of British MPs and especially hardline Tories not to accept this. And I have to say, as we speak, there has been, and I ask to Michel Barnier and to Jean-Claude Juncker if they can confirm this during the debate, there have been not one legally feasible and practical alternative being put forward on the table by the UK at this moment. So clearly, I have to tell you that the backstop, as it is in the press today, in the British press, to limit the backstop to agricultural products, I think it's not enough because they're only representing 30%, 35%, I think, of the total imports of goods and services between the border. And a backstop can also not be unilaterally ended by Stormont because that's not a safety net, but that will be a permanent instrument for blackmailing during the coming negotiations. A safety net needs to be a safety net in the hands of both parties, not only of Northern Ireland, but also in the head of the European Union. And then my last and final remark, the future relationship. I think it's good to repeat, dear colleagues, because we are a new parliament. More than 60% of our members are new. So it's important that we repeat that we recall that. It's good to repeat that this parliament will never accept an agreement with the UK where Britain can have all the advantages of free trade and zero tariffs, and not aligning with our ecological, health, social standards in the future. That will not happen. I can tell you one thing. I know that there are some people in Britain who think, well, these Europeans at the end of the negotiation, they will give in. Well, that's maybe possible, but we are not stupid. Huh? We are not stupid, and that means that we will not kill our own companies. We will defend our own companies. We will defend our own economy, we will defend our single market, and we will never accept what people call a Singapore by the North Sea. That will not happen, dear colleagues. Finally, to end, you know, Brexit started, as we all know. It was an attempt by David Cameron to heal the divisions in the Conservative Party and the Tory Party. And the consequence has been enormous divisions in British society. What we will not allow, we as Europeans, that this Brexit is creating turmoil and divisions in our European Union and in our European project.
Grazie onorevole Verhofstadt.
Thank you very much,
Onorevole
Mr.
Lambert,
Mr.
a lei la
Lamberts,
parola, prego,
you have the
Presidente.
floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, nous n'avons pas choisi
Thank you, President. Colleagues, we didn't choose
nous respectons le
Brexit,
choix
but
d'une
we
majorité
respect
d'électeurs
the choice of
britanniques
the
et la meilleure
majority
preuve en est
of
que nous
voters
avons
in
de
the
bonne foi.
UK, and
Négocier un accord qui permet
the best demonstration
la
of that
séparation
is
que
that
nous
we have in
regrettons
good
entre le
faith
Royaume-Uni et
negotiated
l'Union
an
européenne.
agreement which will govern the
Mais je voudrais
separation which we
préciser que
regret
la
between the
décision
EU and the
par le
UK.
Royaume-Uni de
But the
quitter l'Union
decision
européenne ne
by
libère
the
pas
UK
le
to leave the
Royaume-Uni
EU does not
des
free the
obligations
UK
juridiquement
of
contraignantes
its
qu'il a
legally
contractées pendant
binding
45 ans
obligations
comme
which
membre de l'Union
over a
européenne
period of
et
45 years
au
as a member
titre
of the EU
des
that
accords de
it has
paix
acquired.
dit du vendredi saint qui ont
And
quand même mis fin
also under the
à un
Good Friday
conflit qui a
Agreement,
coûté la
which has
vie
put an end
à
to
3000
a
personnes
conflict
et
which
a
cost the lives
ruiné
of
celles de
3,000
tant d'autres.
persons and ruined the lives of so many
Nous
others.
regrettons que le Premier ministre britannique ainsi qu'un nombre important de
It's a source of
représentants
regret for us
au
that the
Parlement
UK Prime
britannique
Minister
ignorent
and
ou
many
feignent
representatives in
d'ignorer
the UK Parliament
l'existence de ces
failed to
obligations.
recognise the
La position
existence of
affirmée
these
par le Premier ministre
obligations.
britannique constitue,
The
pour
UK Prime
résumer,
Minister's position seems to be,
dire
to
aux
sum it
Européens,
up, to say
je
to
vous demande
the
d'ouvrir une brèche de 500
Europeans,
kilomètres
I
dans le
would
marché
like you to
intérieur,
open up a
tout en
500
affirmant la
kilometre
volonté
breach in
déterminée
your single interior
d'engager à
market,
l'égard de l'Union européenne
while at the
une
same
politique
time
de dumping fiscal,
allowing
social et
tax,
environnemental
social and
intolérable. Vous
environmental
comprendrez
dumping policy that would
que
simply
cette
be
attitude n'est pas de
intolerable.
nature à créer dans le
Now,
chef
that
des
kind of
27 États de
attitude
l'Union
is
et de
unlikely
nous-mêmes ici
to
au
create
Parlement européen
amongst the
la
heads of
confiance
state of the
nécessaire
EU members or
à trouver
amongst
une
us
issue
here in the
négociée
European
à
Parliament
l'impasse actuelle.
a willingness to seek a way
Si la
out of the current
perspective d'une
impasse.
sortie sans accord
If the
reste
perspective of
d'une
a
actualité
no-deal
brûlante et est donc
exit
loin d'être écartée.
is going to be
Je veux dire à toutes celles et ceux,
eliminated,
en particulier au
then
Royaume-Uni, qui se
obviously
réjouissent d'une telle
that needs to
perspective ou
be
qui
addressed.
s'imaginent que face à une telle
Now,
perspective, les
some
27
are looking forward to the
plieraient les
prospect of a
chiffres.
no-deal
Je voudrais simplement leur
exit.
dire ceci. C'est
I
qu'entre
would
deux
simply
mots,
say to them,
celui
in
que constituerait
a couple of
indéniablement une
words,
sortie sans accord
that
et
a
celui bien
no-deal
d'une
agreement
atteinte
is
irrémédiable à
far
l'intégrité du marché intérieur,
worse
les
than
27 choisiront toujours
the
le moindre de ces mots. Mais je ne voudrais pas terminer sur cette note et le pire n'est jamais sûr. J'ai l'honneur et le bonheur de compter au sein de mon groupe politique 11 eurodéputés britanniques. Ils font partie de ces millions de Britanniques qui savent où se trouve l'intérêt de leur pays, c'est-à-dire au cœur de l'Union européenne. Je le dis clairement ici. Si le Royaume-Uni, que ce soit par la voix de son Premier ministre ou par toute autre autorité constituée, devait demander à l'Union européenne une extension du délai prévu à l'article 50, nous devons accéder à cette demande. Tant qu'il existe une possibilité pour que la raison prévale, nous devons tout faire pour saisir cette possibilité. Je vous remercie.
Grazie Presidente Lambert. Presidente Zanni, a lei la parola.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zanni.
Grazie Presidente, io
President.
rimango allibito ogni volta di più dall'avversione verso
I
la
am
democrazia che
struck by
quest'Aula e i
the aversion to
rappresentanti
democracy,
di
which is
quest'Aula
often voiced
dimostrano.
by
Ci si
members in
permette
this
di dare
Parliament.
lezioni
It's
di
striking. They
democrazia
allow
a una
themselves
delle
to
democrazie
issue
più
lectures on democracy to
antiche
one of
del
the most
mondo, a uno dei
longest-standing
parlamenti più antichi del mondo, quando
democracies
questo
and
Parlamento e
parliaments
queste
of the whole
istituzioni hanno
world.
dimostrato
We
negli
hear this
anni, anche
time and time
ultimamente, di
again.
avere
The
un'avversione ai
institutions have
principi
shown that they have
democratici,
an
di
aversion to the
escludere
principles
le
of democracy.
minoranze dalla
Minorities
rappresentanza
can be
o di
excluded
avere
from
un processo
representation.
decisionale che molto spesso
Decision-making
non è
procedures
portato avanti dai
can run
rappresentanti
their
eletti
course
di
without
quest'Aula,
being
ma da
supported by
burocrati
elected
non
members,
eletti da nessuno.
rather by
E lo
bureaucrats
specchio
who
di
have been elected
questa
by nobody.
arroganza si
This is a
percepisce
spectre of
dall'incipit della
unparalleled
risoluzione che
arrogance,
la
and
maggioranza dei
it
gruppi
is manifested in the
parlamentari
resolution
di
which the majority
quest'Aula
of the
si
political
prestano,
groups from
hanno
this
scritto e
House
ci
have
prestiamo a votare. Ecco,
compiled for this
l'incipit di
debate.
questa risoluzione
Looking
recita:
at this
considera la
resolution,
Brexit un
we see
evento
that it considers
deplorevole.
that
Ecco,
Brexit is
per
a
voi
deplorable
l'esercizio democratico, il
proposition.
massimo
Now, when you
esercizio
see
democratico che è un
exercise in
referendum, è un
democracy,
evento
which is what a
deplorevole. Vi
referendum
permettete
is
di dare lezioni
par excellence,
di
you can't
democrazia
describe
al
it as
Parlamento
deplorable.
inglese.
And
Questo
you
è
cannot start issuing
vergognoso.
lectures on democracy
La
to the British
cosa
Parliament. This is deplorable.
estremamente
This is something which
preoccupante
is
è che
of the
questa
greatest
avversione
concern
non è
to
relativa
myself
solo
and my
a quello
colleagues.
che stiamo
This
vivendo
applies
sulla
not only
Brexit,
to
ma
what
nella
we're living
storia
through in the context of
recente o meno
Brexit,
recente
but
dell'Unione
much more
Europea. Ci
widely
sono
to the whole
un sacco
history
di
of the
esempi
European
di
Union in
come
recent
queste
times.
istituzioni, le
There
istituzioni
are
dell'Unione
multifarious
Europea
examples of
siano
the same
state avverse
attitude
alle
throughout the
decisioni
European Union,
dei cittadini.
where
C'è
the
l'esempio
decisions taken by the
dell'Irlanda,
citizens have been
c'è
objected
l'esempio
to
della
by
Francia, c'è
the
l'esempio dei
institutions. It's the
cittadini
examples of the
olandesi,
Netherlands,
l'esempio dei
of France,
cittadini greci
where
che hanno detto no a
citizens where
ingerenze
they took
forti di
decisions saying
Bruxelles, ma
no to
purtroppo sappiamo che le
interference on the
cose
part of
sono
Brussels.
andate in
But
maniera
as we
diversa.
all
Ecco,
know,
più
things
che
went down a
preoccuparmi
different
della chiusura
course.
del Parlamento
Therefore,
inglese, che è
we may
una
abhor
pratica
the
prevista
prorogation
dalla
of the
legge
British
inglese, mi
Parliament, but this is
preoccuperei
done within the
dell'avversione che
British
questo
law.
Parlamento ha per i
And
risultati
this
elettorali e
Parliament has its
soprattutto
own
per i
version of
referendum.
electoral results,
Passa il principio che
particularly
le decisioni
referendums.
prese
And I
liberamente
am
dai
concerned about the
popoli
fact
che
that
non piacciono
freely
a
taken
queste
decisions
istituzioni
taken
devono
by people
essere
which don't please the
in qualche
institutions of the
modo,
European
in modi
Union,
anche
can never be
magari non
accepted. They
proprio
have somehow
ortodossi
to be
cambiati. Ecco,
reinterpreted in
io
an
credo che
unorthodox way so
il
that they
vero
can ultimately
punto della
be
Brexit
changed.
sia
The
la
real
paura
point
che le istituzioni
underlying this
europee
whole
hanno, la
Brexit
paura
discussion is
che
the fear of the
qualcuno possa
European
mostrare
institutions.
un'altra
The
via e la
clear
paura che il
fear
Regno Unito
which
fuori dall'Unione Europea
is
possa
that the
dimostrare
European
che
Union
forse
might
questa
lose Britain, that
istituzione
Britain
non
will
è
leave
perfetta,
the
forse
European
questa
Union, and this is a
istituzione ha
demonstration of
commesso
the
degli errori e
errors
forse
of the
qualcuno
past
può liberamente
by the
decidere
European
di
Union and
prendere
the fact
un'altra
that it's
strada
not
e di
perfect.
dimostrare
A
che
country
si sta
can't go
meglio
its
o
own
si
way
può
and
stare meglio anche al di
aver and
fuori
indeed possibly
dell'Unione
prove that it's
Europea.
better
Questa è
off
una libera
outside the
scelta
European
dei
Union. It's a
cittadini
free choice
britannici e noi
exercised by the
abbiamo
citizens of
l'obbligo
Britain,
di
the obligation situation is incumbent upon us to respect this freely made choice.
punire come
We
qualcuno
can't
in quest'Aula e in
start
queste istituzioni
undermining
vorrebbe
it.
i
We
cittadini
can't
del Regno Unito
espouse
solo
a
perché
position at
hanno deciso
variance with it,
liberamente di
and we
prendere
can't
un'altra
say that
strada
a freely
non
taken
rende onore al
decision by
progetto che
the
volete
British
sostenere.
is
Ecco,
not
piuttosto
acceptable
io
to
ancora
us
in questi
and
3 anni
is
non ho
not
visto un serio esame di coscienza da
in
parte di
line
queste
with our
istituzioni
principles.
e da
This
parte
is
di
not
quest'Aula, un
acceptable.
esame di
This
coscienza
House
per
has
andare a
to
capire
re-examine
le
its
radici
own conscience,
profonde del
I argue. We
perché
have to
uno
look at
Stato
the
membro ha
deep-seated
deciso
roots
di
which have
abbandonare
led to
l'Unione
decisions
Europea, del
such as
perché
this,
uno
that
Stato
citizens want to
membro
leave
ha
the
detto
European Union.
basta
A
a
member
questo
state has said
progetto
enough.
che voi
They want to
considerate
draw the line under a
infallibile
project
ed
which you think is
ineluttabile ma che
infallible
ha
and
evidenti
perfect, but
difetti.
which
E io
they
piuttosto che
clearly see
guardare
as
quello che
absolutely
accade nel Regno
riven with
Unito mi
defects.
preoccuperei della
Therefore,
grave
I'm
crisi
concerned about what is going
istituzionale,
on. I'm
economica
concerned
e
more
politica
about
che
the
oggi
great
affligge
economic
l'Unione
and
Europea, una
institutional
crisi
crisis in the European Union
interistituzionale
than I
tra il
am
Parlamento,
about
il
what's going on in
Consiglio e gli
Britain.
Stati
There's an
membri,
institutional
una crisi
crisis in the European
interna
Union
anche al
across all the
Parlamento con
institutions here
i gruppi
and within this
politici
European Parliament.
estremamente
The
spaccati
political
e
groups are
divisi che
divided,
sono riusciti ad
absolutely
eleggere a
fractured,
confermare sul filo di lana il Presidente
they
della Commissione
have
e
only
un
just managed
futuro
to cobble
politico
together
che
a
ancora
majority
non
to
si
put in
vede.
place
Non
a
date
Commission
lezioni a chi ha
President-elect
scelto
with no policies
liberamente
yet.
di
This
prendere
is
un'altra
not
strada,
the
ma
way that we
riflettete
should
più
be treating a country
profondamente
which has
su quelli
decided
che
to go
sono
its own path,
quelli che
which has
sono i
taken a
problemi
decision
profondi che queste
through the ballot
istituzioni
box to do
hanno,
this. It
altrimenti
is not
l'Unione
worthy of
Europea
the
non avrà alcun
supposedly
futuro.
democratic principles of this
Grazie.
institution, which will have no future any more than the European
Presidente
Union
Van
will. Thank you.
Orden, prego, a lei la parola.
Mr. President, may I first of all thank Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier for their broadly helpful and positive remarks this morning. The British government wants a deal, not any old deal, but one that is acceptable to the British Parliament and the British people, and we need to get it over with quickly. So we must leave on the 31st of October. We should have left on the 29th of March, then on the 12th of April, now on the 31st of October. What's the point of further delay? Some of you may think that if we drag this out a bit more, then there'll be a change of regime in Britain, maybe a change of heart, and I believe this is total delusion. What sort of relationship do you want to see with Britain in the future? A positive one, based on friendship and goodwill and mutual interest, or one based on anger and bitterness and exclusion? Everyone engaged in the process who genuinely seeks agreement must redouble their efforts to get a deal. This requires goodwill and flexibility on both sides. Remember, in the EU, nothing is possible and everything is possible if there is political will. On EU citizens, the British government has been very clear. They are welcome to stay and it's committed to protecting their rights. More than 1 million applicants have already been given settled status under the British scheme, and there is lots of time for the rest to apply. The European Union needs to adopt a similarly generous approach towards British nationals. The outstanding problem is, of course, the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. No one has a greater interest in peace than the people of Northern Ireland and the British government. For all its failings, we're committed to the Belfast Agreement, the so-called Good Friday Agreement. This agreement, by the way, does not mention the border. It is, however, based on parity of esteem between the two communities, the two traditions in Northern Ireland. And please don't forget that the majority of people in Northern Ireland are unionists. They're proud to be both Northern Irish and British, and they wish to remain so. Some in this House seem to have forgotten this. So both the EU and the UK must apply some creative thinking to find alternative arrangements to the safety net, as I much prefer to call it. I don't think the Verhofstadt resolution, by the way, contributes anything useful at this stage. We would like to see a Brexit steering group that is truly democratic, fully representative, and a real source of wisdom and ideas, not just repeating tired mantras. After all, the final deal needs the approval not only of the British Houses of Parliament, but of our European Parliament as well. And colleagues, I say to all of you that represent parties of government, it's time to get cracking. Pick up your phones. I know Mr Barnier needs no instruction, but he needs to do a deal. And the Council must urge him to get on with it before it meets on the 17th of October. Colleagues, let's not lose the opportunity for that fresh and exciting partnership between the European Union and the United Kingdom to serve all our people well in the years ahead. Thank you.
Grazie. Presidente Schirdewan, prego, lei la parola.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Als ich neu hier im Parlament war, hörte ich mal, wie ein Brexiteer sagte, ich muss ein Imperium zerstören. Und was er natürlich meinte und worauf er sich bezog, war die Europäische Union. Aber erreicht haben die Brexiteers mit ihrer Politik lediglich, dass das Vereinigte Königreich sich in der größten politischen Krise seit Jahrzehnten befindet. Eine Krise, für die Arbeitnehmerinnen und Arbeitnehmer, die Rentnerinnen und Rentner und auch die kleinen und mittelständischen Unternehmen die Zeche zu zahlen haben werden. Diese Politik ist weder im Interesse der britischen noch im Interesse der europäischen Bevölkerung. Und die Regierung von Boris Johnson weiß das auch ganz genau. Stichwort Operation Yellowhammer, was wie ein schlechter Titel eines James-Bond-Films klingt. Dahinter verbirgt sich eine Lageanalyse der britischen Regierung, die davon ausgeht, dass es zu Versorgungsengpässen bei Medikamenten, bei Nahrungsmitteln kommt, dass soziale Unruhen aufkommen, dass der Konflikt in Nordirland wieder entsteht. Aber die Regierung scheint genau diese politische Strategie zu verfolgen. Wir sagen, das ist ein absoluter Irrweg. Und wir reden hier auch nicht über abstrakte Dinge, wenn wir über einen Brexit mit oder ohne Abkommen reden. Wir reden hier darüber, dass zum Beispiel ein deutscher oder ein polnischer Krankenpfleger nicht weiß, ob er noch eine Aufenthaltsgenehmigung in Großbritannien haben wird, um dort im Gesundheitssystem zu arbeiten. Gleiches gilt für die Arbeitsgenehmigung. Wir reden darüber, dass eine britische Rentnerin nicht weiß, wie es mit ihren Rentenzahlungen weitergeht, wenn sie in der EU lebt. Und wir reden auch darüber, dass eine Familie in Belfast ihre Kinder morgens in die Schule schicken möchte, vielleicht in Zukunft wieder Angst haben muss, dass auf der Straße etwas passiert, so wie es früher in den Jahren des Bürgerkriegs gewesen ist. Wenn Sie diese Politik fortsetzen, darüber sprechen wir, wenn wir von einem harten Brexit sprechen. Und dagegen muss auch die britische Politik endlich etwas unternehmen und den Willen dazu zeigen. Und wenn ich an Großbritannien denke, meine Damen und Herren, werte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, dann fällt mir ja vieles ein, zum Beispiel eine wehrhafte Demokratie, die dem Faschismus widerstanden hat. Ich denke an ein Kolonialreich mit all den Schattenseiten einer Kolonialgeschichte. Ich denke an ein Land, das Denker hervorgebracht hat wie Thomas Hobbes und John Maynard Keynes. Und als Sozialist erinnere ich mich, dass Karl Marx in London Asyl gefunden hat. Aber woran ich ganz bestimmt nicht denke, und da geht es mir ähnlich wie dem Kollegen Verhofstadt, woran ich ganz bestimmt nicht denke, ist die Comicfigur Hulk. Ich sage Ihnen, eine Comicfigur wird weder den Friedensprozess in Nordirland bewahren, noch die sozialen und zivilen Rechte der Bürgerinnen und Bürger schützen. Das kann nur eine kluge Politik erreichen. Dafür stehen wir als Linke hier im Europäischen Parlament und deshalb unterstützen wir die vorliegende Resolution. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Grazie. Onorevole Sinčić per i non iscritti.
Hvala. Danas govorimo ovdje o Brexitu.
We are talking about Brexit today. There have been several attempts to obstruct the results of the British referendum. This is wrong. What is the logic behind this obstruction of the referendum? To repeat the referendum 2, 3, 4 times until we obtain a different result. Is that the logic of a referendum? This is taking democracy ad absurdum. So I would like to paraphrase Edward Grey, British Foreign Minister from the beginning of the First World War, who said something like relationships, agreement, word should mean something. Otherwise, we can just have a go at each other. So this referendum has to mean something. And as it has been said, it has to be respected. The referendum also speaks about the will of the British people. Here to my left are 29 Brexiteers for the strongest party in this parliament. The CDU has 23, Brexit 29. Brexiteers. This speaks about the will of the British people as well. Also, if we look into the future, several weeks ago, Mrs. von der Leyen spoke about common foreign policy as something to be introduced and based on outvoting. I think this is terribly dangerous. Mrs. von der Leyen cannot be telling Croatia what to think about Bosnia-Herzegovina, Malta, USA or anybody else. This is a way to worsen the relationships in the future. Enough with this federalization. Euroscepticism, some will say, is dangerous. That may be, but it depends. Euro-fundamentalism is dangerous. The thinking that Merkel's way is the only way is equally dangerous. There is no room for redefining relationships or politics. And if this is not allowed, Brexit is only the beginning. What we need is a faster way for exit for those countries whose people's will is to exit.
Madam Hübner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, colleagues. We are having this debate and will vote today this Parliament's 5th resolution on Brexit on a day when the British Parliament is under suspension. What a paradox, one might say. Yes, I am convinced that most of us here continue to regret that Brexit takes place, and we continue to be committed to a Brexit in an orderly fashion. The withdrawal agreement to which this House has contributed by working very closely with Michel Barnier, thank you, Michel, this agreement provides legal certainty to all those affected by Brexit on both sides, but in particular citizens and small businesses, and citizens' rights remain the major concern of this House. This agreement facilitates the unprecedented and I must say impossible to understand withdrawal of a modern state from a preferential trade area and the disentanglement of links created during 45 years of British membership in the Union with the least amount of disruption. This agreement creates also a good foundation, also political, upon which to build future relations between the EU and the UK. Once it's finally approved, it will open the door for a status quo transition, giving time to negotiate alternative arrangements and future relationship. The backstop, a temporary insurance policy tool, which is a measure of last resort, in principle never to be used, is an important part of this agreement. I regret that the UK has so far not put forward legally viable and operative alternative arrangements that could replace the backstop, delivering on all its objectives. We are patiently waiting for this to be done. There is still a chance for agreement, and I believe we must be clear that no deal solution would be entirely the responsibility of the British government. We know that even the best preparedness, colleagues, to no deal is only a mitigating mechanism. No deal does not provide for a transition with a potential extension. It does not solve the issue of citizens' rights, the Irish border, the budgetary settlement. And let me say that in spite of everything that was said by Prime Minister, I still hope for a deep, broad and close relationship based on regulatory convergence and respect of level playing field. Sorry for being too long. It's too late to be sorry, Danuta. The truth is we are all overrunning on time, and at this moment I think we have 14 catch-the-eye requests. So we really have got to ask people that when I knock the gavel, it's either to ask people to be quiet in the chamber or to stop speaking. So our next speaker for 3 minutes, Mr. Silva Pereira. As Vice President, you will of course respect the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. We are here once again to discuss Brexit democratically, freely and openly, as any parliament should be able to do in such a crucial moment. In fact, this European Parliament is the only fully operational parliament representing British citizens today. The joint resolution tabled by the Socialists, together with other major political groups, shows how united we are in setting our position on this regrettable process of withdrawal of the UK from the EU. We fully respect the will of the British people, but if Brexit is to happen, it should be done in an orderly way, as no deal is for sure the worst way to do it. Of course, we heard Mr. Boris Johnson saying that he wants to reach an agreement with the EU without the Irish backstop. If not, the UK will anyhow leave the EU by the end of next month, even if without a deal. But if Mr. Johnson was really serious about the willingness of reaching an agreement in the next few days, he would have done by now a very simple gesture: to put forward a written proposal on workable and legally operative alternative arrangements. He failed to do so, and so he failed to give evidence that he is serious about the willingness of avoiding no deal. So let me put it crystal clear. Should the UK crash out from the EU without a deal, this would be entirely the responsibility of the UK government, no one else. Mr. Chairman, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords approved an act obliging the UK government to ask for an extension of Article 50 if an agreement has not been reached. There was never a mandate for a no deal given by the British people. There is now no mandate for a no deal given by the British Parliament. Therefore, we welcome the fact that this resolution makes clear that the European Parliament would support an extension of Article 50 to avoid a no-deal scenario. The way we see it, an extension of Article 50 is also important for the UK to find a political solution, and when the time comes, give back control to the people so that people can have a final say on Brexit.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Ms. Gibson.
Today we are in danger, grave danger, danger as perilous to the European Union as it is to the United Kingdom. Danger of allowing our fatigue with the almighty debacle that is Brexit to make us too anxious to move on just to end it. The danger is to democracy, to stability, to the rule of law, to the sovereignty of parliaments everywhere, to the rights of citizens. I urge this Parliament to support this motion, to overcome your Brexit fatigue, to support an extension of Article 50, to allow the UK Parliament the time needed to defeat the would-be dictator who has lied and cheated and silenced the mother of all parliaments. The danger is real. Brexit in any form is bad, bad for all of us. A no-deal Brexit is a disaster. It is worth taking the time needed to allow us to fight to stop it.
For 2 minutes, Mr. Smith.
President, thank you, colleagues. Good morning. Brexit's been a matter of frustration from the very start, a thing to be regretted, a thing of sadness. And from a Scottish perspective, it's also been a thing of grave injustice. We voted to remain within our family of nations. The people of Northern Ireland voted to remain within our family of nations. The peace process there is sacred and must be protected. Now, Scotland's argument is not with you, I assure you. It's with a dysfunctional, broken Westminster that's not fit for the modern world, not fit for the interconnected, interdependent world we live in. I don't ask you to solve our domestic problems. You must deal with the interlocutors you're dealt. I'm sorry for that. I'm trying today to avoid a terrible mistake for all of us, for Scotland, for the UK and for the European Union. I hear the argument every day back home that we need to get Brexit delivered, we need to get Brexit done, we need to get Brexit past us. I hear the argument here also that you're sick of British nonsense. Me too, if it's any consolation. I appreciate you want an orderly process to mitigate the damage of Brexit. And I'm sorry, colleagues, I have news for you. There is no good Brexit. There is no sustainable answer to this. The people that you are dealing with, the empty vessels of the Conservative Party, have even now exited the chamber, and their tormentors, have absolutely no plan for a durable, sustainable future relationship. If Brexit happens, with or without a deal, they will use that as a pretext to slash and burn at home in the UK, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and in England. Social dumping, environmental dumping, economic dumping right off your shores. There is no such thing as a good Brexit. There is no such thing as a good outcome to this. I cannot support the resolution today, despite your best efforts and your good faith. I do not believe this withdrawal agreement will deliver because of your interlocutors. Scotland has other chances in this. We need more time to reverse Brexit. Please give us that time. Thank you.
Are you finished? Have you finished? Sorry, who is making that comment? Because it's just coming. Sorry, guys, I'm in control. Excuse me. Thank you. Mr. Beck, for 3 minutes.
Verehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, President. Great Britain in chaos. We see warnings in the British media, mocking in the German media, as was the case with the hysteria before the Brexit referendum. However, there are serious consequences. Great Britain is the third largest German export market, and together with the USA, the most profitable. For the rest of the EU, it's the second largest export market, and with a hard Brexit, there could be losses of German jobs in tens of thousands, particularly in the car industry. We'll also see the loss of the UK contribution of 10 to 12 billion euros, and the costs will detrimentally affect the country of Germany.
Divorce. The UK has negotiated in good faith, perhaps rather too much faith, when it agreed to all the EU's initial demands over the negotiation timetable, EU citizens' rights and the divorce bill. The EU responded by concocting the issue of the Irish backstop. But who seriously believes that sporadic or electronic customs checks would lead to the resurgence of violent terror in Ireland? Not even Michel Barnier, who's trying to use the backstop to keep Britain in a permanent customs union, or to force a referendum against the entire financial and political establishment and against all received politically correct opinion. The British people voted to leave the EU by a majority of 52 to 48%. Exactly the majority by which the European Parliament confirmed EU Commission President von der Leyen. 17.4 million British citizens voted for Brexit, the largest number of British people who ever voted for anything. Now, Michel Barnier is a shrewd and skillful negotiator, but he's trying to reduce the UK to a vassal state or alternatively is risking massive job losses in the EU. Either or, either outcome is unacceptable.
For 1 minute, Mr. Lundgren.
Tack för ordet, fru talman. Brexit.
President, thank you. Brexit, as we know, is characterised by contrasting positions between the EU and the UK. Some are trying to put forward real potential solutions. But in the previous centuries, we've seen a very different situation. For example, Britain was never part of the ECSC. And the situation really is quite reminiscent of those days when in 1957 the customs union was established. The decision was taken that it would be effectively a framework which would enable free trade and might eventually involve Britain and other countries. But things moved on in a different way. There was the free trade area, there was EFTA, and gradually other countries became involved in that, and eventually the European Union expanded more. The framework, however, at the outset was much more flexible than it is now, and we now find a situation where one country wants to leave the Union and we have to let it.
1.5 minutes.
Acharja, my Irish passport says that it is the entitlement and birthright of everyone born on the island of Ireland to be part of the Irish nation. As this resolution clearly states, we Irish in the north of Ireland are therefore entitled to EU citizenship where we reside. Whilst the backstop is essential to prevent a hardening of the border partition in Ireland, to protect the all-Ireland economy and North-South cooperation, it takes us out of the EU against our will. We in the north of Ireland voted to remain. It is important that this Parliament recognises, as stated in the resolution, the legitimacy of whatever choice is freely exercised by the majority of the people in the north of Ireland, to our right to change its status, to our right to self-determination, as recognised in the Good Friday Agreement in British and Irish law. The European Council statement stated that in the event of Irish reunification, all 32 counties would remain in the EU. The French President Macron stated that the solution to the Brexit problem is Irish reunification. Lord Ashcroft's opinion poll, like others, shows a majority in favour of Irish reunification. The Good Friday Agreement provides a peaceful, democratic pathway back into the EU for the people of the north of Ireland, and that should be respected by all.
Mr Farage for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, one thing is clear, and that is from the emollient tone we've heard this morning from Juncker and Barnier, we're actually very close to a deal on the backstop being agreed at the summit on the 17th of October. And of course, both sides will try and present this as a negotiating victory. Maybe worth reminding ourselves that this treaty, even without the backstop, is a very bad deal for Britain. It'll leave us trapped inside European Union rules. It'll leave us under the auspices of the European Court. And having given everything away in the withdrawal agreement, the worst part is that any future relationship relies on good faith. We put ourselves entirely in your hands. We put ourselves, indeed, at your mercy. And I would suggest that events that we've seen across Europe this week do not indicate that good faith exists. I'm, of course, referring to the pipsqueak Prime Minister of Luxembourg, who set out to ritually humiliate a British Prime Minister in the most astonishing way, only to be greeted like a hero by President Macron at the Elysee Palace yesterday. And it's very clear to me that keeping us trapped inside this was the objective of Barnier's from the start, to keep us inside, and you said it this morning, to keep us inside the customs union. And we've seen from other speakers today, the fear is that the UK breaks out of the customs union, breaks out of single market rules, and we become more competitive and we become much wealthier outside the European Union than within it. Mr Verhofstadt, we want no part of your European empire. The only way forward now to deliver on the referendum is for a clean break Brexit. Once we've done that, we'll have a grown-up conversation about trade and about the way forward. Thank you.
Mr. González Pons, 1.5 minutes.
When I was a young student and started to get involved in politics, I looked at Great Britain as the highest example of what a democracy should be. Not anymore. Today, British democracy is a shadow of what it was because politicians as Nigel Farage. Today, when Great Britain lives its darkest hour since the war, the Parliament has been shut down. This Parliament, in the very last moment of the negotiations, is open. The British Parliament is closed. That's the reason why we all have to speak English today here, because we are representing not only the European people, but also the British people. This is today the British House of Democracy as well. Today, Great Britain has been taken by nationalist politicians unable to see beyond their own physical and mental borders. We have been negotiating in the fairest possible way. We have always acted in good faith. We never lied. Jean-Claude Juncker, Michel Barnier are good negotiators, but they are gentlemen as well. I'm wondering if current British Prime Minister can say the same. We will not oppose it if an extension is required, but we want to know when and until when and why, because we have no more time to waste. I urge the Prime Minister to respect the British Parliament, and I urge him to respect democracy in Europe, because Brexit now is not only a disaster, it is the name of the biggest mistake in the current times.
Mr. Corbett, 2 minutes.
President, we have a chaotic political situation in Britain at the moment, but colleagues should not for one moment think that this Prime Minister, nor that lot over there, represent the entire British nation. They do not. And although Mr. Johnson claims that he is seeking a deal, he has not put any actual proposal on the table, and the ideas he sometimes floats for a solution are ones that would not be acceptable either here or to the British Parliament. He is, in fact, heading towards a no-deal Brexit. But the British Parliament has legislated to prevent such an outcome, to require him to ask for an extension rather than have a no-deal Brexit. And a majority in the British Parliament also now, and remember he is now a minority government, he's lost ministers, he's expelled members from his party, it's a minority government, and every single opposition party, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Greens, Scottish Nationalists, Welsh Nationalists, every single one wants a new referendum, and in such a referendum, faced with a Boris Johnson deal or a no deal, would campaign to remain in the European Union. It's important for colleagues to remember that. And no matter how frustrated you are with the British government and its Prime Minister, bear with the British people. Public opinion is shifting on this. A new referendum is justified. A new referendum is justified because Brexit bears no resemblance whatsoever to what that lot said during the referendum campaign. They said it would be easy, it's difficult. They said it would save lots of money that would all go to the NHS, it's costing a fortune. They said it would be good for the British economy and jobs, the opposite is proving true. That is why Leave voters are entitled to say, this is not what I was promised, this is not what I voted for, and it's right to give the British people another chance to look at this. Please bear with us. Please give us that necessary extension. Ask your Prime Minister to give the extension necessary for us to sort this out. Thank you very much.
For 1 minute, Ms Long.
Madam President, I was elected as a cross-community pro-European voice for the people of Northern Ireland, a majority of whom voted to remain in the EU referendum and for Remain parties in the European elections. Membership of the European Union matters to us. Our European citizenship is a shared identity, uniting our people, both unionist, nationalist and the growing number of us who identify as neither. The Good Friday Agreement was founded on European principles of interdependence and cooperation. It must be protected. Yet our government, propped up by the DUP, refused to hear us. The DUP did not speak for a majority in 1998 when they opposed the Good Friday Agreement. They do not speak for the majority in Northern Ireland now, either on Brexit or on the backstop. There can be no good or sensible Brexit, but a no-deal Brexit would be catastrophic in Northern Ireland. Ignore those who say that no deal is no problem. Listen to those who live and work across the border. They know differently. The UK Parliament is working to try to avoid a no-deal Brexit. We now need EU leaders in this Parliament to give them the time they need to succeed, and we appreciate your patience. Brexit will affect all of our futures. It is important to get it right, not just get it done.
Could I just ask, particularly this side of the House, if you're having conversations while somebody's speaking, just to try and whisper, because it is quite disruptive, and that applies to everybody. I now give the floor for 2 minutes to Ms Scott-Cato.
President. From the start, Brexit has been about control. But far from taking back control from Europe, Johnson and Cummings have lost control of the country. The nationwide protests about the prorogation of Parliament, an outrageous usurpation of power unmatched since the 17th century, have meant the British Prime Minister is unable to appear in public anywhere in the UK or even, as we see recently, in Luxembourg. We now know what take back control really meant. It means taking control away from our representatives in Parliament, taking control away from the civil servants, taking power away from those who are upholding the rule of law. Brexit has not given control to the people or to Parliament, but to wealthy oligarchs who want to avoid paying tax, and to global corporations who want to tear up the laws that protect people and planet. This is why the commitment to an equal playing field on environmental...
Could you slow down a little, please, for the interpreters?
This is why the commitment to an equal playing field on environmental standards, employment rights and consumer protections in the Parliament resolution are so important. We cannot allow a race to the bottom where the UK ends up as a tax haven, a sweatshop, or goes back to being the dirty man of Europe. Tragically, 5 million EU citizens have lost control of their lives and been shamefully turned into bargaining chips as they struggle to keep their families together and their lives on track. I deeply regret that this Parliament has failed to suggest that their rights should be ring-fenced in our resolution. Although the situation in my country is chaotic and democratic institutions are being tested to breaking point, both our MPs and our courts are taking positive action to protect democracy. The clear message of our resolution today is that we look to the European Council to grant the UK the extension we need to enable the democratic forces in Britain to regain control and end the political crisis. Only we, the people, can resist the tyranny of Johnson and his cabal. We depend on our friends in the Parliament and in the Council to give us the time we need to take back control from the moneymen and the oligarchs. Only a people's vote can guarantee that the majority who now wish to remain at the heart of Europe can stop the Brexit nightmare.
Two minutes, Mr. Madison.
Thank you, Chair. On 23rd June 2016, the European Union membership referendum was held in the United Kingdom. On that historic day, a majority, 51.89%, chose to leave the European Union. It has been more than 1,000 days since the referendum took place, and every single day since then, political elitists, both in the UK and in the EU, have held the people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland hostage. The decision of the UK voters to leave the European Union is binding, and those in power have a legal duty to give effect to the results of the referendum. Certain politicians may think they possess superior wisdom by preventing Brexit, But they should be reminded that even though the people may not be the ones who govern or legislate or interpret the law, they are the source of that power. This is something the political elitists of our time conveniently tend to forget. The EU is quick to preach to third countries about democracy and the rule of law, but in its own backyard, democratic results are only respected when they correspond with the ideology of the EU federalists. The possibility to join the EU was always accompanied by the corresponding possibility to leave. However, what has become clear is that politicians are doing everything in their power to prevent the UK from leaving the EU. Even the Guy Verhofstadts of this world can even be seen in a video drinking to the fact that they have succeeded in keeping the UK hostage for at least 5 years. Boris Johnson promised new hope that Brexit might finally be delivered. However, the House of Commons constantly undermines him, most recently by voting in favour of rendering a no-deal Brexit unlawful and effectively taking hope. The Council could block a further extension. Johnson could negotiate a different deal or leave without a deal. The people of Europe will not be silenced and will not be held hostage. By ignoring the will of the people, the EU is becoming the architect of its own downfall, unfortunately. And it is time for the EU to listen to the people and to respect democracy and the sovereignty of nations, and it is time for the EU to practice what it preaches.
Thank you.
And everything. Thank you.
Mr. Zahadril, for one minute, please.
We have 6 weeks to Brexit, and if nothing happens, UK leaves on 31st October without a deal. But still, many people in this House make mistake by thinking and believing that we have a deal, and that there are only some troublemakers on the UK side that are blocking it, and they have to be brought to senses. But all this is not true. We do not have a deal. We have just a draft that was dismissed 3 times in the House of Commons, and which current UK government, pretty legitimate government, doesn't accept. There's a saying, there must be 2 to tango, but unfortunately it seems that we dance pretty much alone. So any sensible option, in my feeling, is that this EP has to ask European Council to mandate European Commission to renegotiate the deal. Otherwise, we end up in 6 weeks with no deal, with very damaging consequences for our economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan, 1 minute.
The number one thing we've got to do here is respect people's positions.
Microphone.
Number one thing we've got to do here is understand how the microphones work. But anyway, number one thing we've got to do here is respect people's positions. Respect that the people of the UK voted to leave. Those that voted to leave need to respect that this causes massive problems for people in the border areas. At the moment, the best solution available is the backstop. We must, however, be prepared for a crash-out. If this happens, then the principle of EU solidarity will be truly tested. Up until now, this solidarity has come in the form of words. Yet again today, we hear from Jean-Claude Juncker about solidarity. Ireland exports 250,000 tonnes of beef to the UK every year. If we lose this market, then we will need to find other markets immediately. Who better than our European neighbours? Do we have the capacity? The answer is yes. If the UK crashes out, then Ireland needs a new market. We imported in the EU over 300,000 tonnes of beef from the Mercosur countries last year. In the case of a no deal, we need the new Commissioner for Trade, Phil Hogan, to turn this off to a trickle if he really means solidarity.
Thank you. Your time is up. Madam Dodds, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Firstly, I would like to reaffirm my strong belief that an orderly withdrawal process is the best and preferred way forward for the European Union, for the United Kingdom and, to be specific, for our neighbours in the Republic of Ireland. I have always believed that this is in our interests and will work to achieve this end. However, that withdrawal agreement must not damage the constitutional and economic integrity of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland's place within it. The agreement must also meet basic democratic tests. The backstop endangers these fundamental principles. This House has confirmed on a number of occasions its adherence to the Belfast Agreement. Indeed, it was referenced this morning by President Juncker and Mr Barnier. One of the core principles of that agreement is parity of esteem between the two traditions in Northern Ireland, meaning that citizens from both the unionist and nationalist traditions are treated and heard equally. Just last week, the former Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern, himself an architect of the Belfast Agreement, spoke out on the importance of parity of esteem and is quoted as saying, "Any solution has to include the unionist people because parity of esteem in the Good Friday Agreement is both sides." Let's be clear. The letter sent to the European institutions, and which gives rise to the statement in point 5 of the resolution, was not signed or supported by a single member of the Northern Ireland Assembly from the unionist tradition. Every unionist party which stood in the European elections did so on a platform of rejecting the backstop. A recent opinion poll says that 81% of unionists are against the backstop. There is a democratic problem with the backstop, Mr Barnier, and you cannot wash your hands of it. Not only would Northern Ireland be subject to swathes of legislation with no control or representation, the Union...
I'm really sorry, Ms Dodds. I have to be very strict. Mr Tajani, for 1.5 minutes.
Signor Presidente.
President, the Constitutional Affairs Committee, which I chair, has decided that it is indeed a great honour to have an opportunity to express the views of the citizens in Britain and in Ireland, and we have actually listened attentively to the views of the citizens in Britain and in Ireland. We feel it's important to speak up also for the 600,000 Italians and others who live in the UK. We need to speak on behalf of all the citizens, the British citizens in Europe, the Irish citizens on the island, the Irish citizens elsewhere. This is a place where the citizens need to feel that somebody is speaking up for them, and this is the institution which is supposed to reduce the distance between the citizens of Europe and the European institutions. And we have sought to bring this about in the AFCO committee. We've looked long and hard at the border issue in Ireland. It's very important that we draw people's attention to this because it is one of the core issues of the whole problem. We need to find a way of strengthening and underpinning the principles of the peace agreement. We also need to look at the implications of the backstop arrangement. The security forces are very worried about how to protect the border area. If it is a flexible frontier, then our companies and our farms will potentially be running the risk of another mad cow disease epidemic. So a flexible border is one thing, but the reality is that agriculture and industry will be running serious risks, to say nothing of our companies and our people. Thank you.
1 minute, Mr Benefit.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The 31st of October is looming, and Prime Minister Johnson has not yet come forward with a political proposal which can be debated by European leaders, and that is why we are now running the risk of a no-deal exit. Now, of course, this is the preferred option of the Conservative Party leadership, but the opposition, which is led by Corbyn, has taken a number of initiatives to successfully shut down such a disastrous outcome. In this debate, I want to defend the 3 million European citizens who live and work in the United Kingdom, amongst whom are over 700,000 Italian citizens, and they continue to engage in business and to contribute to the wealth of our countries. And if the UK were to request one, then I would be prepared to grant an extension to Article 50, but only as an instrument to try and thwart a no-deal exit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Kelleher, 1 minute.
Yes, I wish to support the resolution, and in doing that I also want to say that I accept the decision of the United Kingdom in terms of leaving the European Union. But equally there's an obligation on the United Kingdom to accept that a great democratic process took place on the island of Ireland in 1998, where people north and south overwhelmingly supported the Good Friday Agreement. And in that agreement, we talk about an all-island economy, we talk about parity of esteem. And just to put it in context, colleagues, day in, day out, people cross an invisible border. They go about their daily lives. A crash-out Brexit will have implications for that freedom, the freedom to go about commercial life, social life, cultural life and sporting life. So in the context of this debate, I support the resolution, and I ask the United Kingdom in particular to accept that it has duty-bound responsibilities to uphold the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement, bearing in mind it is also a peace process. So in I accepting the fact that the United Kingdom wishes to leave the European Union, I expect the United Kingdom to do its duty and honour bound the Good Friday Agreement.
Ms Evans for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Cyfeillion, colleagues, I've represented Wales in this European Parliament for 20 years. It's been my greatest privilege and my greatest challenge. But now we face the most challenging times of all. Westminster has failed Wales. It does not work for the people. It's a parliament in turmoil. But I ask you to look beyond that, at other things that are happening. Over recent months, I have marched with many thousands of people all over Wales in support of independence, and that support is growing. 40% of people now say they would support Welsh independence if it meant that Wales could remain in the European Union. We have the right to determine our own future. To resolve the current crisis, we must put the whole thing back to the people in a referendum, and we need the time to do that. I will continue to work for that and for Wales's future in Europe. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wilimski for 1 minute, please.
Danke sehr, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
Thank you. First of all, allow me to express the misunderstanding that exists. The UK and the EU are both capable of implementing a referendum decision. If you look at this House, you see two camps, one saying Brexit is bad, one saying Brexit is good. My opinion is those views are insignificant. My views are insignificant. The only thing that counts is what a majority of the British people want. It is our sacred duty to show respect for a majority of the British population which has reached a clear decision. So please use the time up until the 31st of October to meet and negotiate and reach an outcome which is efficient, professional and fair. And just stop this theatre. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Mr. Bourgeois.
Thank you, President. Our group does not belong to the Brexit steering group, and we feel that this is an affront to democracy in itself. But the NVA delegation from Flanders will support the resolution because we feel that we must do our utmost to achieve a deal. No deal is a bad deal, and we hope that our negotiators will continue to work in a constructive spirit. There seems to be a glimmer of an opening where flexibility might help in the negotiations to achieve a result. We might be able to achieve something in terms of the backstop and the internal market and integrity thereof. Mr. Barnier has quite rightly said that there's more at stake than simply trade, and I'd like to underline that. Defence, research and innovation, university cooperation, the blue economy, all kinds of support measures, globalisation funds. There are many, many different strands to all these problems, and many of the companies in the Netherlands actually don't even have 50 workers. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I think it's all so easy to pretend, as many people have here, that Brexit is all about the crazy Brits. If Brexit is about anything, it's about the failure of the neoliberal ideology entrenched in EU institutions thanks to Lisbon and Nice, and ironically also entrenched in the ideology of the ruling classes in Britain. It's about soaring rents, decline in wages, privatisation and undermining of public services, conditions that exist in many countries throughout the European Union. And let's not lie about it. It is about democracy. You know what? The UK mightn't be doing too well in the democracy stakes, but neither is the European Union. So while I don't care about the establishment in Britain cannibalising itself, the people on the island of Ireland have to live our lives, and we cannot have a hard border. We have to have our human rights respected and not sacrificed. But if people here really believe in solidarity and a peaceful and socially just Europe, as I do, we have to abandon the road that this European Union is on and abandon neoliberalism.
Mr Dobney, for 1 minute.
Well, we've heard a lot today about Emperor Verhofstadt's plan to build a new European empire. Today he compared Boris Johnson to Mrs Doubtfire. But let's face it, Mr Verhofstadt is the Darth Vader of Europe. And this place, his Death Star, where national democracy comes to die. As for the empire, I'm here for the 17.4 million to strike back. 75 years ago, my forefathers fought and died on European soil fighting fascism. Today, we are here to liberate the United Kingdom from the European Union. For the past 3 years, despite paying £1 billion a month for membership, we've been treated with nothing but contempt. And today it got worse. The so-called level playing field, I hate to play football against you, Mr Barnier, the match would be rigged. Brexit has shown that the European Union does not believe in democracy. Today, we are expected to be voting to call Brexit a regrettable event. Well, let me put it into language you understand. Je ne regrette rien. We are leaving the European Union and we have no regrets.
Mr Kelly, for 1.5 minutes.
In time, historians might describe Brexit as the incredible sulk by the self-styled Incredible Hulk and his allies, who want to leave the European Union come hell or high water on October the 31st, regardless of the consequences for people, for prosperity or for peace in the island of Ireland. And for that reason, we are so grateful in Ireland for the solidarity of the EU26, articulated so well by President Juncker and Mr Barnier here this morning. Mr Juncker said they're standing in solidarity with the most affected states and showing unity of purpose. It couldn't be stronger or clearer. And Mr Barnier outlined very clearly the necessity for the backstop. There is another consequence of Brexit, and that is, after the Good Friday Agreement, the relationship between Ireland and the United Kingdom grew and became friendlier, culminating with the Queen's visit to Ireland in Croke Park a few years ago. That now has been replaced, unfortunately, by tension and suspicion. I hope, however, that if the United Kingdom asks for an extension of Article 50, and I'm encouraged by what I heard here today, it will be granted. If only, number one, to give Mr Johnson the time to come forward with the abundance of solutions he told our Prime Minister he had to the backstop, and maybe also to give time to the good people of Great Britain to take back control from the Brexit buccaneers who want to leave regardless of deal or no deal.
Your time is up, Mr Kelly. Ms Barley, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Being as well a British as a German citizen, the Brexit is quite an emotional topic for me, as for many others, I guess. And what is the most emotional part is obviously the backstop. What is hardly ever mentioned, though, is that the backstop is only a temporary solution until a final agreement is signed. So why is it such a problem, then? It is because there is a lack of mutual trust, and we see it today very clearly. Some British fear that they will be bound to the EU forever, and at the same time the EU wants guarantees that there will be no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And that is exactly the point. It is not only about the UK, it is also about Ireland, and we have every right to discuss this here because Ireland is going to stay in the European Union. So what can we do? Exactly the opposite of what some politicians in Britain and here in this House are doing, which is to become more and more aggressive, to use war metaphors, and I say this explicitly as a German and British citizen. We will stay neighbours anyway, and we should stay good neighbours in peace. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Madame Loiseau.
Thank you. I would like to thank Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier most warmly for having appeared before this Parliament, a Parliament which has the privilege of listening to you and to debate Brexit. Nobody is trying to suspend or hold up Brexit. We will all shoulder our responsibility and certainly will not harm the island of Ireland with a return to violence, nor will we harm the integrity and robustness of the European Union. We will not go back our desire for peace, the rights of citizens, nor the interests of the European Union. And our Parliament knows how to say what it doesn't want, but it also knows how to say what it does want. And we will continue to be guided by the friendship and respect that we feel towards the people of the United Kingdom. But we need to know what the UK government wants. I mean, we're not sure whether the UK is going to want a further extension to Brexit and whether it has a valid reason for doing so, because the UK government is not saying where, why or how it wishes to leave the European Union. This situation cannot be allowed to go on. We respect the UK, but we have to be respected in turn, and in a climate of mutual respect you have to tell one another the truth.
Mr. Cuff, for 1 minute, please.
Yesterday I heard Michel Barnier speak about a fragile peace. He talked about meeting women in Ireland who cross the border every day for work. They said to him, "We don't want it to start up again." I appeal to Mr Farage and indeed to Mr Johnson. Visit the border. Hear their stories. They are heartfelt and they are real. In Northern Ireland, the tensions are always present. Violence is never far away. My Irish colleagues Claire Bailey and Vincent Martin have first-hand experience of this. They proposed a confirmatory vote for those who live in Northern Ireland. Let the UK exit the backstop whenever it wants, but first put a question to the people of Northern Ireland. Best of both worlds in a free trade area or the UK only? Let them decide. The poet Seamus Heaney once wrote, "Believe in miracles. Believe that the further shore is reachable from here." Like Heaney, we have to believe in miracles, but we must not lose hope that a solution can be found.
Thank you, Mr Cuff, and I approve of your choice of poet and have quoted him in this chair. Our next speaker for 1 minute is Mr Rinaldi.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Listening to our colleagues who have spoken here during the course of the debate this morning, it transpires clearly that the consensus is to seek a repetition of the referendum in the UK until you get the result that you want. But this is not how democracy works. It works differently. When Ursula von der Leyen, for example, was elected by 9 votes or so, nobody said we had to hold another election, even if half of this Parliament clearly disagreed. So could I remind you of these facts? Could I also say that the UK is a net recipient of goods and services within the context of the European Union? So what does this mean? Does it mean that we're going to be penalising the UK? Who are we going to sell our cars to? Who are we going to sell our food to? Our electro and white goods? So let's remember the reality and let us try to come together with a constructive proposal. When it was necessary to prop up the banks, there were meetings all night long, and immediately a solution was found. But as far as the UK is concerned, people just don't seem to have the commitment to try to achieve a real solution. So I therefore propose...
Sorry, your microphone has been cut. Thank you. Mr Dzhambazki, for 1 minute, please.
Благодаря ви, уважаема госпожо председател.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is obvious and more clear that Great Britain will drop out of the Union without a deal, and this will be to the detriment of everyone. Our exports of goods and services will be impaired. The peace in Northern Ireland will be under threat. The UK will leave the Union, but it will not leave Europe. It will still be a part of NATO and one of our most important partners. There must be a solution for the problem in Ireland, and the leaders of the European Union must understand that the backstop, as proposed now by Mr. Barnier, is unacceptable for our British partners. We can only look forward to a proper deal once this matter of the backstop has been resolved. Otherwise, we would be placing under a risk not only the economy of Europe, but also the confidence of one of our most important partners. Thank you very much.
Madam Rodriguez, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much indeed. For Spain, Brexit is a transitional period which gives us nothing useful. Gibraltar is facing a potentially catastrophic situation. The situation of Brexit is threatening the border between Gibraltar and Spain. Currently, more than 20,000 people cross that each day, cross-border workers. There's no contingency plan in this context, and we don't know how we're going to ensure that their work permits are valid, or how their pensions and wages will be affected, how their rights will be affected. If there is a no-deal exit, there will be huge queues, there will be problems with provisions of medicines, sourcing enterprises, the flow of tourism. The situation now is witnessing a parliament which isn't working. There needs to be a free choice here, but there also needs to be a recognition of responsibilities. We should not be gambling with people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I am putting you all under pressure on time, but actually, please slow down, because I think our interpreters are doing a great job. But maybe say less, but, you know, within the time. Our next speaker for 1 minute is Mr. Foreman.
Madam Chairman, distinguished members of Parliament, this is my first speech in this august chamber, and hopefully my last. As I entered this building for the first time, I saw a huge billboard with a quotation about free and fair elections. But I ask you, what is the point of free and fair elections if the result is dishonoured? What is the point of free and fair elections if the losers refuse to accept defeat? What is the point of free and fair elections if freedom and fairness is sacrificed because the elites think that they know best? Madam Chairman, the EU holds itself out as the torchbearer of global democracy, giving hope to oppressed people. But what is the point when it resents the democratic vote of its own people? In a few weeks, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, my friend, may be forced to ask for an extension to the Brexit negotiation deadline. If the EU truly believes in democracy, it has to reject that request. Even if it doesn't like the outcome, if you believe in democracy, you have to stand with the British people. Our exit is long overdue.
I am sorry to cut your first speech, but you ran over time. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Bellamy.
Derrière les éclats de voix de ce matin.
Thank you. Behind what we've heard this morning lie real risks and threats to the future of our countries. The British people has decided to leave the European Union, and we must respect this decision. But today's dialogue will only be useful if it actually sheds some light on a way forward. As you've rightly pointed out, Mr. Barnier, we have to be focused on the essential, which is protecting the interests of the citizens, all of them. If there's a no-deal Brexit and Britain leaves in that way, we will all become more vulnerable in terms of the threats to our security and our ability to defend ourselves. Our cooperation with our British neighbours is essential in terms of intelligence, police, our armed forces. We could be less effective if we can't work together vis-à-vis the terrorist threat and our strategic interests. Our economy would be adversely affected in a context which is already difficult. Need I remind you that we have got to reach agreements with third countries through Britain, and let me mention to you that in the case of no deal, the country of France would have great difficulties in managing the economic impact of the border implications. There are also fisheries problems because the British waters would become closed to us, which would be a major adverse impact on both the British fishermen and the continental purchasers. And therefore, let us please be responsible. I'm recently elected and I'm rather surprised at the turn debates are taking. There's no point in trying to replay a match. We have to make the best of a referendum that was decided by the voters. We need to work together. Michel, I look forward to it. Thank you.
Madame Guillaume, 1 minute.
Now, when it comes to certainty over the exit of the UK, the EP has sent out its message in its resolution, and that is that we send a clear message to the citizens of the UK. We would like to have an orderly exit which respects the rights of citizens in the United Kingdom as well as British citizens in the EU, safeguards peace in Ireland, as well as respecting the financial commitments involved in this divorce. And we are prepared to grant an extension if there were to be parliamentary elections. So we are now eagerly awaiting tangible proposals from the UK Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has to face up to his responsibilities. Now, we have read that for 3 years somebody has been suffering in silence for 3 years. David Cameron, who for tactical reasons triggered this chaos, which is hardly in keeping with the UK's traditions.
1 minute, Mr. Garicano.
More than 150,000 Spaniards live in the UK, and in turn 300,000 Brits live in Spain. For all those citizens, what Mr Farage called a clean break Brexit is a very, very dirty Brexit indeed. Their situation is really dramatic. Just last week I was in the UK talking to Spanish citizens. Their concern has to do with the so-called settled status, which is everything but settled. It's just a PDF number they get on the email that confers actually no rights if Mr Johnson and Mr Farage proceed with their no-deal charade. We need to imagine and put ourselves in the skin of those citizens who, after possibly decades living in the UK, have no certainty if their lives can continue. The EU is doing what it must to protect its citizens. The UK is not. We must stand with these proposals and we must avoid a no-deal Brexit that would be catastrophic for all European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Ms Reintke.
Colleagues, let's be honest. A lot of people are tired. A lot of people are exhausted. They want to move on. They think that if we are not granting the extension, then we can go about other business and we can actually get rid of all this drag that we have been seeing in the last month and in the last years. But colleagues, let us make no mistake. If we are not granting this extension and if there was a no-deal Brexit, none of this nightmare would be over. The question of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland would not be solved. The budgetary questions would not be solved. And also the question of the citizens of the EU and the UK and what their future is going to be would not be solved. So, colleagues, it's not the moment for short-sightedness. It's the moment for solidarity with the hundreds of thousands of British citizens who are marching in the streets, who are calling on us, who are counting on us, that we will grant this extension and that we will give time to get out of this deadlock
talk and find a solution for this mess that we are in.
I think you get the prize for sticking exactly to your time. Well done. For the next speaker, and no pressure, Mr. Krasnodowski, 1 minute, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm listening to this debate and I'm asking myself a question: what conclusion you could actually draw to what we should prepare? And I think that the conclusion would be as follows. We should basically prepare ourselves for the worst no-deal scenario. Apparently no one wants it, but most likely this is the possible scenario or something that will materialize. One thing I would like to emphasize: responsibility in this historical moment, and also responsibility for this disaster, the size of which we cannot even imagine, will be borne by both sides. I hope that our negotiator and Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker also realise what responsibility it is. I think negotiations should be renewed as soon as possible, should be done in a way to avoid this disaster. I think that putting off Brexit forever will lead us nowhere, will only create more chaos and legal uncertainty. So, gentlemen, please do start acting. Thank you.
For 1.5 minutes now, Mr. Rangel.
Thank you, President. It is evident that we didn't want the exit of the United Kingdom. And even if we regret it, we fully respect the choice of British people. All the negotiations were made in a truly spirit of cooperation and good faith, finding the best solutions for both sides. All this time, very much due to the stolidity and serenity, the true British phlegm of Michel Barnier, we have shown goodwill, good faith and respect. And I assume it with no swell. If any leader, European politician or leader, has not respected in any occasion the British position or institutions, that is regrettable. But please read our lips. We are open to consider your proposals if you present them. We are open to an extension if that is justified. You can believe us. We want to make your life easier, but we expect reciprocity. Please, it's time to urge Prime Minister Johnson. It is unfortunate that you decided to turn to American superheroes to express the inclination of British government when you have much better sources of inspiration in the modern and popular British literature. Mr. Johnson, do you really believe that what we need here and now are the hard skills of Incredible Hulk? Wouldn't the skills of the very British, much smarter and magical Harry Potter serve you better, Mr. Johnson?
I'm really sorry, Mr. Rangel.
Please forget the American Hulk and find inspiration.
I have to be fair with everybody. I do apologise, but really we are over time. And, Mr. Rangel, you will have the floor again if you accept a question from Mr. Habib. Okay, for 30 seconds for both the question and then 30 seconds for the answer. Mr. Habib.
It's on, is it? Yeah. For 3 years we've heard that the EU is a rules-based system. Mr. Rangel mentioned the preparedness of the EU to negotiate with us a new form of withdrawal agreement, perhaps some alteration to the backstop. But actually I just want to remind this chamber that by its own volition, clause 12 of the agreement which gives effect to the extension until 31st October prohibits any opening of the withdrawal agreement and any further renegotiation of that agreement. So how is it that this rules-based system can take that approach?
Well, I'm not going to ask you to even answer that because the question came after the 30 seconds. The rest was a statement. So for 1 minute, Mr. Moreno Sanchez. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom is in a chaotic situation, facing a hard Brexit, which results from the lies of some political leaders who deceived their population and led the government to undermining the pillars of its own democracy, closing Parliament. In this context, a historical situation which is extremely damaging to all European citizens, especially the British, the position of the Socialist delegation from Spain is clear and categorical, in line with the resolution that we will be voting on today. No to a hard Brexit. Yes to an orderly Brexit based on the withdrawal agreement agreed upon by the 27. A non-negotiable agreement which will ensure the safeguarding of the rights of our citizens. An agreement which protects peace in Ireland through the backstop to prevent the re-establishment of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and guaranteeing the integrity of the European single market. Members, time is pressing and therefore we need to recognise the responsibilities of the UK government to right their course. We still have time.
For 1 minute, I give the floor to Madam Beer.
Dear Mrs. President, dear colleagues, the scenario of a no-deal Brexit is real. Among the relevant groups of this House, we all agree on the catastrophic consequences of a hard Brexit, in particular for the citizens of Ireland and the British overseas territories. Of course, not to forget the United Kingdom itself. The work on the contingency measures is in full swing, and I particularly appreciate the Commission's recent proposals to provide support to small and medium enterprises. This should be done comprehensively. But above all, I sincerely congratulate our colleagues in the British Parliament on their determination to put their Prime Minister in his place. This move gives hope for an orderly withdrawal agreement or even for a second chance for them to remain as a part of the European Union. We all together should take this chance, and God save the United Kingdom.
For 1 minute, Mr. Beto.
Madame la Présidente, chers collègues.
President, colleagues. The prospect of a no-deal Brexit has not been overcome. The impact on European agriculture and fisheries would be huge. I think they have not yet been properly assessed. It's clear that dairy, meat and wine sectors would be seriously adversely affected. Brexit run the risk of being an unprecedented crisis. We're fumbling around in the dark here, and the producers in Ireland are on the brink of the precipice, as Mr. Flanagan has rightly said. Phil Hogan is the Commissioner for Agriculture, and he is more than well aware of this. He's talked about €50 million in the agriculture budget to try to mitigate the shocks. He is absolutely right to be so concerned. The European Commission therefore needs to put forward to this Parliament a comprehensive proposal to support all European farmers who will be adversely affected by Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Madam Vretsanova. Micro.
Za necelý měsíc a půl dojde k Brexitu.
In less than 1.5 months, we will have Brexit. We know that, and we all should come to terms to it, even though we do not wish it. Many in this House prefer direct democracy. The referendum is the cleanest form of democracy, and the outcome must be respected. The European Commission and Council should use the time that remains to prevent the hard Brexit, which will be harmful not only to the UK but also to the member states of the UK, to the citizens and to the companies. To close such a deal, it must be approved by both parties, and it is clear that the UK does not agree with the current form of the deal. So this must be changed.
We now have Mrs. De Lange for 1.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, as you know, the reason I once went into politics was called foot and mouth disease, an animal disease that, as they do, doesn't stop at borders and touched my country, the Netherlands, yours, Ireland, but also France and the United Kingdom at the beginning of this century. And hundreds of thousands, even millions of farm animals were killed for a disease against which they could have been easily vaccinated. And the outcry that this created in rural areas was not heard in London, because the British government at the time didn't want to change the so-called non-vaccination policy. So it was this House that represented the interests of both Europeans and British in order to change this policy, and that worked together with places like Northumberland and the Scottish borders. Fast forward 20 years and the constructive, pro-European Tories I worked with at the time have been purged out of their party by people who can't even be bothered to attend this full debate. Westminster is closed for business, and it is once more this Parliament that is representing the interests of both the British and European citizens. And like a majority, dear friends, of British citizens, this House doesn't want a no-deal Brexit either. But let me also be very clear. We will not accept access for products with lax financial oversight in case of the financial sector, low environmental standards and low animal health standards into our European market. And if you want to know why, go and ask the farmers in Friesland and Northumberland alike. Thank you very much.
For 1 minute, Madam Kampula-Natri.
Mr President, membership or not, the British remain among us and we live together. We representatives of the citizens from the different member states take this seriously, and we cooperate with our British colleagues here deeply and in a warm way. Parliamentarism is to need to be protected. It is core of the democracy. In Parliament, different ideas meet and then we look way forward. In Western democracy, the governments represent the will of the majority of the Parliament. In the UK, a law designed to stop no-deal Brexit passed in the UK Parliament, both houses. So in principle, we should not worry. But now it seems that Prime Minister Johnson tries to take control away from his Parliament, to take control away from British. The new UK leadership is still flirting with the idea of no-deal Brexit, and they appear to have become more hardline. EU should remain calm, principle-led, united and reasonable. We cannot decide on behalf of the Brits, but we will give them time if they want to clear this mess up.
Madam Haranzova, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will not reiterate what has been said. I think most of us do not wish Brexit. Some of us still hope that it is not perhaps going to take place after all. But I'm afraid that the British Prime Minister is ready to throw the United Kingdom overboard. Leave without a deal. Nothing worse could happen. Therefore, the Commission must continue to get ready even for this scenario. And more than that, the Commission and the Member States must have a contingency plan for European business. We shouldn't allow it to fall along with Brexit. We must insist on rights of more than 3 million European citizens that live on the islands in great existential uncertainty. They don't know what kind of Britain they're going to wake up in on November 1st. The British policy on Brexit reminds me of looking for a unicorn. Nothing stands, deadlines change, what has been approved is taken back and cancelled. Time is running out, and of course the European Union is running out of patience, and no wonder. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Kuźmiuk.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, as I participate in this debate, I would like to point out three most negative points resulting from no-deal exit. First of all, the uncertainty for this EU citizens who live in the UK. With a deal, they would be guaranteed. Secondly, a deficit of about 50 billion euro. That's the amount that the UK has committed to pay for its commitments up to 2020. And thirdly, problems in mutual trade. The European Union holds a large surplus in this trade, about £100 billion in 2017. A no-deal Brexit would lead to this trade being carried out under WTO regulations, including tariffs and quotas. I believe that for these three reasons alone, it would be advisable for the European Union to ensure that there is a deal with a modified political declaration with goodwill gestures addressed towards the UK. Thank you.
Mr. Niedermayer, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam. I guess everything important about Brexit was said. The position of EU 27, Council, Parliament, Commission is clear and transparent and stable. Still, we should not miss opportunity to reach the agreement that will reduce cost of Brexit for all Europeans. I mean also Europeans from UK as well as from the continent. And if the extension would increase the chance of such a result, we should grant it. Still, I guess there are things that we should learn from our friends from London that can make our society better and avoid the crisis that is ongoing in London. First of all, I believe that the politicians should sometimes admit that the personal interest, power, even in victory in election, is less important than the future of the country and society. Second, I believe, and this is not just for politicians, we should more talk to each other, at least in the situation that our views are not so different. We should rather construct the bridges than build the walls. Last but not least, we should promote the culture that is preferring the facts and truth over the lies. And this is very important. We should, together with civil society, schools, experts and other parts of the society, make sure that a current alarming trend when the lies are rewarded over the truth will not continue and will be changed, and that those biggest liars will not become the presidents or the prime ministers. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Mr. Liberadzki.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I'm not questioning the right of the UK to leave the EU. However, I would like to draw your attention to the following: political responsibility for the fate of Europe. And this political responsibility is a principle by which the Council, the Commission and the Parliament abide. There is over 1 million Poles living in the UK. We try to protect our industry, our trade, our transport, our economic interests. However, lack of responsibility is something that characterises now the UK government. I have an impression that war or peace, the UK thinks it's our problem, it's our responsibility, it's not their problem. They want to stick to the benefits, however, they do not want to share responsibility. I don't think there are any constructive proposals as to the solutions. There will be life post-Brexit. Confidence is absolutely key, so I'm appealing to the UK government. Try to build this confidence. Without confidence, there will be no good solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchuk for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. 3 years after the referendum, the British citizens are sending us a strong signal that Nigel Farage is not the voice of the British society. Every day they are expressing a vocal opposition to Brexit, and the presence of so many pro-European British MEPs in this Parliament is the real proof of the fact. A change is much needed now, because Brexit continues to be pursued for a Tory party advantage, but with no plan for how to deliver it. By insisting the backstop to be removed from the withdrawal agreement, but without proposing a working solution, The UK government refuses to secure an orderly withdrawal. Families, their children, students, all our citizens want to have a certainty. More than 3 million non-British EU citizens, of which 250,000 are from my home country, Bulgaria, have been living in a legal limbo, but also in frustration, anxiety and disappointment since the referendum. As we all see, Brexit is a bad idea and should be stopped. Thank you.
For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Peters.
President, colleagues, much has been said here this morning, but one thing is crystal clear. Huge challenges lie ahead with Brexit. A no deal would put 1.2 million jobs minimum at risk in the EU, and in Belgium some 42,000 jobs, 28,000 alone in Flanders. The SMEs are going to pay the highest price and bear the biggest burden. And it seems that the British government can't even see any way out of this Brexit which Britain chose for itself. However, we have got to prepare the EU for a no-deal Brexit, and we've got to prepare our citizens for it. On the 4th of September, the Commission put forward some proposals on the Globalisation and the Solidarity Fund to make available some funding in extremis. But it is not clear whether the smaller SMEs will be able to access this. In the resolution, which I entirely endorse, if you look at point 14, there is a clear statement to the effect that this Parliament needs to work as rapidly as possible to make sure that the financial assistance necessary for SMEs is put in place to ensure that the burdens arising from Brexit are kept to a minimum and that there really is provision to help them. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Pizzula.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 3 years have passed from the Brexit referendum, and many have been in this House surprised by the result. But after 3 years after the referendum, UK is still not ready to take responsibility for Brexit or the responsibility for giving up on Brexit. So negotiations have been concluded. Thank you, Mr. Barnier. The EU has clearly stated its position. But on the other side of the channel, we see political chaos, and this is a country that has actually laid the foundation to democracy, and their parliament today is under suspension. It is difficult to distinguish strategy and what is political bluffing and avoiding political responsibility. But one thing is clear: we cannot let Brexit endanger cohesion of the EU and all we have achieved. Thank you.
For 1.5 minutes now, it's Mr. Bilček.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, honourable colleagues. European citizens are the core DNA of this Parliament, and it is our essential duty to protect them whenever we can. The European Parliament has always supported the united EU approach to dealing with Brexit and its negative consequences for the lives of Europeans. And I'm glad that the proposed parliamentary declaration maintains the emphasis on the unity of EU27. However, I do feel it is even more important to maintain the unified European approach to Brexit, especially now, in order to protect citizens from all EU member states, smaller and larger, who are residing in Britain. In particular, we have to be strongly united in our insistence that the UK government exerts the utmost effort to offer the settled status to all qualified EU citizens without any unnecessary technical hurdles and political delays. At the same time, we in the EU must be united in facing potential consequences of a hard Brexit for the rights of all European citizens in the UK. However much we strive to avoid hard Brexit, we must be ready to face it together in unity for the sake of equal protection of all EU citizens should we be confronted with the worst-case scenario of the UK's departure from the Union. Dear colleagues, let's remember that the unity of EU27 has been at the core of our successful negotiations with London, and we must therefore reinforce it in the run-up to the most difficult decisions on Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Regner, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. For 3 years now, the Brexit hardliners have failed to come up with a plan as to exactly how they wish to exit the European Union. In this Parliament, we do not wish to see a no deal because it will affect all of us. Now, the European Union recognises equality between men and women, as well as labour rights, maternal leave, trade union rights for part-time work, and all of these guarantees would simply melt away if we were to have a hard Brexit. And the biggest losers would be women in the UK if we were to have that hard Brexit. They're less mobile than men. They often work in healthcare and in retail, and they often look after family members. So as long as we continue to hold out our hand, we should continue to do so, because extending a hand is always better than self-cynical and self-destructive combative mentality.
Mr. Kurtzos, 1 minute.
Thank you. I think this Brexit thriller is very much like the Grexit thriller in 2015, and although Boris Johnson is politically very far removed, he is following very much the same approach as Alexis Tsipras, because they both put party interest over national interest, and they both pretended for a time to be negotiating, although what they did was travel back and forth to capitals, and they both pretended that they weren't interested in the consequences of their actions and that they had no feeling of risking anything. But to pay tribute to Tsipras at the last moment, he did somersault and he made a U-turn of 128 degrees because he faced a harsh reality, and he was supported by President Juncker. I'm afraid Boris Johnson is not going to follow the excellent example of Tsipras, and is not going to improve his policy. So I think that we should be monitoring what happens at the level of the British Parliament, the British people, the British youth, and send them the message that we will stand by them. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Michel Barnier, for 1 minute, please.
Tak for det.
Thank you. The UK will be leaving the EU. I personally find that regretful, but that's the choice of the British, and obviously we need to respect that. But it's almost unforgivable if that exit takes place in the form of a hard Brexit. It will have huge consequences on a huge number of people on the other side of the channel. It will cost jobs. It will affect families and students, research. I think it's necessary perhaps to allow more time, to allow ourselves to find a solution, to avoid a hard Brexit, and find a solution that does not affect our citizens and economy. So I would support getting a bit more time to get an agreement in place. So let's avoid a hard Brexit. It's not useful for anybody at all.
Mr. Warborn, for 1 minute.
Tack, fru talman. Det finns mycket att säga om Brexit, men jag ska begränsa.
Thank you very much indeed. A very great deal could be said on Brexit, but I shall simply comment on 2 points. First of all, the trade relations. As far as Sweden is concerned, this is important because Britain is our 5th trading partner, and this generates a lot of employment throughout the entirety of Europe and a great deal of prosperity. But in 43 days and a few hours, we're running a severe risk of a no-deal Brexit, which will have an equally severe impact on our prosperity and our future welfare. If there's any possibility of deferring it and conferring and agreeing an extension, I think we need to be clear about the conditions under which we would potentially envisage this. I would argue the case for a generous interpretation of the position, because I would like Britain to stay in the European Union, of course, leaving aside what possible future relationship might be possible. I would certainly like to have optimal trade relations. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Madam Fritzon. You're sitting in a different seat. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Fru talman, läget I Storbritannien är allvarligt.
Thank you very much indeed. The situation in the UK is extremely serious. If we have Brexit in a few weeks' time, that will mean that the UK crashes out of the EU, and a no-deal Brexit would have very damaging reverberations across Europe and also affect Swedish interests. And there are consequences both for people as well as business, and there will be enormous consequences of a hard Brexit. In my own country, for example, we have 100,000 Swedes who have left the country and live and work in the UK, and this is a real worry for them. And the same applies to the British people as well. They have an uncertain future ahead of them. And I believe that this Parliament resolution is well balanced, and it simply reiterates the various demands that we made in the past. We've got an agreement, and I believe that we are being very open. We're worried about our future, and I would therefore call on Boris Johnson to face up to his responsibility. He's got to look to the interests of the country.
McAllister, 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to underline a lot of things that have been said by colleagues this morning, but I would like to add one dimension to a no-deal Brexit when it comes to foreign policy. Michel Barnier was referring to the political declaration. And yes, the political declaration, the EU and the UK have agreed on a broad future relationship with a free trade area, police and judicial cooperation, and also on a close cooperation on foreign policy, external security and defence. Now, following a no-deal Brexit, the United Kingdom could no longer collaborate in existing and future projects of the European Defence Agency and in military projects under PESCO, and moreover, it will be difficult for the UK defence companies to participate in projects under the European Defence Fund. These are additional arguments, dear colleagues from the far right, why it is so important to avoid a no-deal under all circumstances. I would like to welcome this motion for a resolution, and I would like to thank the colleagues of the Brexit Steering Group for once again doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dance for 1 minute.
Thank you. Let's be clear about where the blame for this mess lies. You start with impossible promises, saying we can keep the existing trade relationship with Europe, but rip up the rule book. You then say we can negotiate from a position of strength, despite leaving the world's largest economic bloc. You then decry all opponents of this fantasy as traitors, and then you then move on to say the British people voted for medicine and food shortages. They did not. The country I love is better than Johnson. It's better than them. Monsieur Barnier, you wish to move on, we all wish to move on, and I know many of my colleagues are fed up with this debacle. I get it. I understand it. But let's not pretend that the withdrawal agreement would be sustainable without public sign-off. The British people need to put the reality of Brexit up against remaining in the European Union. Give us the time, give us the options. That's the only sustainable way forward.
Mr. Sikorski is for 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I'd like to start by congratulating Mr. Barnier for the professional way in which he has conducted these negotiations. The authors of Brexit said that they would be cutting themselves off from a corpse. We've proven to be a very lively corpse. Well done. And it looks to me like a deal is within reach. The point at which British red lines and our red lines are coinciding is the wish for no hard border in Ireland, and therefore the solutions to be a Northern Ireland only backstop by whatever name. And I understand that we would be willing to go along with that. So a deal depends on whether or not the British political process can accede to that. I hope it does. The Brexiteers, English nationalists, cheer for a no-deal Brexit. Your own government says it will be a disaster. I only have one request to Mr. Farage and his accomplices. If you get your way and the British government proves to be correct in its assessments of a no-deal Brexit, don't blame us for the consequences. I support the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for your assistance on the timekeeping. It's much appreciated, but not necessary. For 1 minute now, Mr. Ruiz de Veza.
Thank you, Madam President. Almost 70 years ago, we Europeans decided to establish our political union. And we did so because we knew that was the best way to preserve peace in Europe and also to tackle transnational challenges that now are very obvious to us, like climate change and others. Unfortunately, in 2016, in the Brexit referendum, a narrow majority in the UK voted for leave. At the time, it was said that this was an existential crisis of the European Union. But now, 3 years afterwards, we see that the existential crisis indeed is in the United Kingdom. The Union is stronger as ever, as others have said before me. And now the question is Mr. Boris Johnson ready to fulfil the legal obligation derived from the bill approved in the House of Commons? We certainly hope so, because a no-deal Brexit will be catastrophic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Ms. Fitzgerald.
Thank you. What many forget and others choose to ignore is that beneath the sound bites and the strongman politics, there are real people, women and men, families, whose livelihoods and business, and indeed very safety, are at risk, as well as the peace on which these livelihoods are built. This European Union, this democracy, has been clear from day one that it is determined to do all it can, deal or no deal, to avoid the need for a border and to protect the peace process. Remember, an international treaty underpins this peace process and co-guarantors. We can never forget that. We know that any additional ideas put forward by the UK will be strongly welcomed and examined by the European Commission. However, this European Parliament will not give its consent to any withdrawal agreement that does not contain the safeguards outlined in the backstop. And to date, the backstop is the only solution on the table that avoids any physical infrastructure. As the great John Hume, a former office holder both in this Parliament and Westminster, once said, "When people are divided, the only solution is agreement."
Thank you. Now, colleagues, we'll come to the Catch the Eye speeches, and I have 19 requests. I will try and take more than 5, but there will be disappointment because there are too many who wish to speak. Madam Šojdrová, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We all know that Brexit is going to weaken the European Union as much as it is going to weaken the UK. I can't really understand, Mr. Farage. How can you say that the UK is going to be stronger, that it's going to be a big deal for you? Yeah, perhaps in relation to small European countries, but certainly you're not going to be in a better position when dealing with China, the US, or Russia. It's just simply not going to be the case. You are going to be weaker. And that's why I'm so sorry that that's your position and that's your policy. When your citizens were making a decision, I'm sure that they didn't vote for this chaos, for this crash out of the EU, because it puts them in an uncertain position. If the UK crashes out of the EU without a deal, they are still going to have to negotiate a new deal with the EU to be able to do the ultimate. You will have to continue with the financial settlement and deal with the condition of the EU. Thank you.
Please, 1 minute. Ms. Ward, please.
Under the Johnson premiership, we are witnessing the decline of decency in the age of populism. Johnson is a most disreputable Prime Minister, an embarrassment both to his party and to country, a misogynist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe, a dangerous clown, a a dangerous clown chosen by less than 2% of our population. He plays fast and loose with people's lives. His no-deal Brexit threatens shortages of food and life-saving drugs, threatens peaceful coexistence. Yes, Brexit will cost lives as well as livelihoods, and it already has. And we have a government policy decided by an unelected adviser, Dominic Cummings, who is a man in contempt of our Parliament. Is this taking back control? We have a government that is eroding trust in our institutions, from the civil service to the court, judges,
everyone is treated
elected
equally.
representatives.
Thank you, Julia.
These
Time is
are
up.
democratic foundations.
I'm sorry, but fewer people will get to speak if everyone runs over. Mr. Newton-Dunn, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I've got a question for Commissioner Barnier. I'm not sure if he's got an opportunity to reply to this debate, but quite simply, if there is no deal, is it correct to say that exchange of information between Europol, our policing centre, and all UK police forces would stop, and therefore the opportunities for organised crime in the UK would be much, much greater?
Madam Shones.
Thank you. Colleagues, I want to start by apologising for the behaviour of a small minority of my compatriots, both in this chamber and in my country. They do not represent the decent, polite and pro-European majority of my people. Brexit is a mess created entirely by leavers because they've never been able to agree on what type of Brexit they wanted. It's a mess that has laid bare the broken nature of UK politics. We need a people's vote so that the British people can finally choose between one clear leave option and remain, which is by far the best deal for us. We therefore need more time. No deal, crashing out, cannot be an option. It would be an act of catastrophic self-harm. So, colleagues, I urge you to do everything possible, whatever your role, to help us avoid such an outcome, just as we in the UK are doing on the streets, in our Parliament and...
Thank you. Mr. Church, for 1 minute.
I'd like to sound a warning about the attempts to present the European Union as a body that is ruled by individuals such as Mr. Verhofstadt. But that might alarm some individuals who feel comfortable in the EU, who want to reform it, who want it to evolve, but we want to be part of it. Obviously, if we hear the tone, the lack of respect of some towards the decision of the British that has been expressed and needs to be respected, well, that is somewhat frightening. So it's important that we reach an agreement. Obviously, it's going to be difficult, but we need to show good faith because we're going to coexist with the UK, a key building block in the defence of the Western world, and we will have to share with them many areas, not just the economy, not just defence, but the future. So let's not break the system that we have.
Respeto. Mr. Guasmo, for 1 minute. Sorry, do you want to say something to me? Sorry, colleagues, please. You're not on the speaking list, but had you indicated, I would have given you the floor. Can I continue with so that we don't run out of time? Our next speaker for 1 minute, Mr. Guasmo, you are ready?
os britânicos pronunciaram-se em referendo sobre o Brexit. E, portanto, não é direito...
The referendum in Britain returned a majority for Brexit. Therefore, this Parliament is not entitled to express its opinion on the outcome of that referendum. It is indeed obliged to respect the result of that referendum, which is what respect for democracy decrees. Those who don't concur with this are failing to make a positive contribution towards trying to find a negotiated and amicable solution to the Brexit issue. At the same time, the Parliament has an obligation to ensure that it does not follow the irresponsible attitude of the British Premier, who is heading rapidly in the direction of a no-deal Brexit, which would prejudice the rights of immigrants and endanger peace on the island of Ireland. All the citizens' rights must be protected to the hilt. That is our paramount responsibility, and as an institution we have the obligation to speak out to protect the interests and rights of all our citizens.
Se ha mencionado la importancia.
The negative consequences of Brexit have been mentioned, and they would affect both parties. I think we need to look at the fisheries relationship between the EU and UK, something that's been recognised by the chief negotiator, Mr. Barnier. Now, if we were genuine to have no withdrawal agreement and the transition it provides us for, then we would have to do what we can to limit the damage to the United Kingdom, and that is why I would like to see contingency measures apply on both sides to make sure that we maintain access to the waters, at least temporarily, whilst we negotiate a future agreement on both sides. I mean, I know you don't like it, but, you know, it's what we need. So I want to emphasise one of the objectives of the European Union, which is to reach an objective which guarantees mutual access to waters and to fisheries resources. And there are advantages for those in the industry.
Ask you to stop. Your time is up. Mr. Wells, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The defence of any country and the means to conduct that defence are essential attributes of sovereignty and are the first responsibility of any government. I am therefore very concerned that the May government collaborated with the Commission after the UK voted to leave to lock Britain's defence and intelligence capabilities into the various EU structures that is intended to subordinate Britain's intelligence and defence capabilities under the control of an unaccountable Commission. This is crystal clear in the political declaration, clauses 104 to 106, which is an integral part of the binding law of the withdrawal agreement under Article 184. I am extremely concerned that UK MPs have failed by a dereliction of their duty to understand this threat, and I would therefore urge our MPs in the UK in the strongest terms to reject any attempt to bring back this awful deal and to deliver a clean Brexit.
Up, and our next speaker on our list, Madam Curtin-Darling.
Thank you, Chair. This week we saw the British Prime Minister hide from British citizens in Luxembourg who will be acutely affected by his bombast and ego. He's hiding from parliamentary debate in Westminster, so it's reassuring that European democracy is alive and well in this House, with all views expressed, those that I agree with and those that I don't agree with. There are those who campaigned for a deal in 2016, the best and quickest deal in history, who today are arguing for a so-called clean break Brexit. There is no such thing. There will be nothing clean in the economic and social devastation that this would bring from the northeast of England to the Falkland Islands. Nothing clean for citizens' rights, which should be ring-fenced now to protect people. and there will be nothing clean in the complete chaos in our health service and elsewhere. Those people have no mandate, and the British public should decide what happens next with Brexit.
Thank you very much indeed. That winds up the Catch the Eye for this debate, and I shall now give the floor to the Chief Negotiator to reply to the debate. Mr. Barnier.
Thank you, President. I can be brief, however, maybe take a minute to thank you, ladies and gentlemen MEPs, on behalf of President Juncker and the whole negotiating team that I have had the honour of leading for 3 years. It's an important debate, and it takes place in a context where we all have different opinions, but we are at a critical juncture. 3 years after the referendum, we are at a moment of truth in these negotiations. It's a moment where we need to keep a clear head. We need to remain respectful of one another, and I will continue to work in that spirit. However, we note many of the contributions and the points that have been made, particularly the parliamentarians from the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, where obviously the risk is greatest. The risk potentially to be brought around by Brexit, the question of the citizens and the points upon which we will never concede, the integrity of the single market and the four freedoms, which go together. So thank you for your contributions. I've also listened to those who made opposing arguments, and there's an accusation that I would like to respond to make sure that things are clear. And I would say to Mr. Sani, who's not here, Mr. Farage, Mr. Madison, and others, nobody is trying to dodge the decision of a majority of the voters of the UK to leave the EU. Nobody is trying to steal Brexit. Nobody is trying to hold the UK against its will in the European Union, in the customs union, or in the single market. It's your responsibility to leave. We regret it. As we've said on multiple occasions, many of us regret this choice. I've never understood or seen the added value, but we need to respect it, and the mandate which has been established by the European Council together with the Parliament, which I have taken upon myself with the confidence of President Juncker and that of Ursula von der Leyen. My mandate is to deliver an agreement, and that requires two things. One, to tell the truth here in the Parliament and to the citizens about the consequences of Brexit. You need to tell the truth. You spoke about the respect of UK citizens. Well, like the rest of the European citizens, they have the right to know the truth about the consequences of Brexit, all of the consequences, which are far more serious, far more numerous than you want to say. You need to tell the truth. You need to be accountable. After Brexit, you are going to need to be accountable to the citizens of the UK, and we will be accountable as well. We are willing to tell that truth about the consequences of Brexit. We are working on an agreement. We recognise the far more serious consequences of a no-deal Brexit. But coming back to the question of Mr. Newton-Dunn and other questions as well, we have prepared scenarios for a no-deal Brexit, including issues relating to security cooperation, Europol. Obviously, no deal is not a final destination. It's a temporary state, and then it will be necessary to resume discussions in order to build a partnership. For 3 years, I've been working with that first requirement in mind, to tell the truth at all times to everyone. And my job is quite simple, to find legally robust solutions. We are building a treaty. We're not making a speech. We need to, in that treaty, ensure that we have serious legal responses to all of the issues that have been given by the choice that has been made to pursue Brexit, whether we'd be talking about Ireland or fisheries or any other area that is affected. Finding specific operational solutions that work. It's not a matter of expressing wishes or desires. It's finding solutions that work, and that's something that we've communicated to Boris Johnson and his team. Alternative arrangements, as President Juncker has said, on the backstop or other issues, need to provide answers to the questions that Brexit gives rise to. So that's the second area that we're working on, and we're continuing working today. Nobody can doubt that we are fully available to consider such possibilities. We will continue to work for the Union with sincerity and determination. Thank you very much indeed.
Grazie.
Thank you very much indeed, Michel Barnier. May I now call, on behalf of the Council, Mr. Preparedness to reply to the debate likewise.
Mr. President, honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, in spite of all the current uncertainty on the UK side, we have to remain open to new ideas should they lead to a breakthrough consistent with our principles. Achieving an orderly withdrawal of the UK has to remain our priority until the very last moment, given the negative consequences of a hard Brexit. Until then, we have to continue our preparation for all eventualities, including through targeted measures at the EU level in order to reduce the potential impact on citizens and businesses. However, ladies and gentlemen, we must also be ready to consider the extension of the Article 50 period if we receive a duly motivated request from the UK government. May I recall to mind that patience is a virtue. We will count on your cooperation at all the stages of these processes. So thank you very much for your opinions and remarks and for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And I have received 2 motions for a resolution to wind up this debate. And the debate is now closed and the vote will take place today. We now move on to the voting, and we will adjourn for just 1 minute to give an opportunity to colleagues to enter the chamber and take their seats. Adjournment for 1 minute.
Allora riprendiamo.
Good. Let us resume the ID group, and non-attached members have communicated decisions to change their nominations to delegations. These decisions will be on the minutes for today's sitting and will enter into effect at the time of this announcement. And we'll now move to the votes. The Howarth report, draft amending budget. Number 1, single vote by roll call. And the vote is open.
Hanno votato tutti?
Has everyone voted? Has everyone voted? The vote is closed. That is carried. Another report by Mr. Howarth. DAB2 rapporteur, who has 2 minutes to introduce this.
Mr President, first I would thank the shadow rapporteurs and the Secretariat for their work on this file. I will be brief, but it's important that these points are put on the record. This draft amending budget number 2 is somewhat different to the norm. It is in fact the final element of the 2019 budget settlement negotiated last December in the second conciliation between the Parliament and the Member States in Council. The agreement with Council was that the final element would be presented as an amending budget during 2019. So today we complete that agreement by reinforcing 2 programmes which, more than any others, reflect in their outcomes the economies of scale and added value of the Union budget, Erasmus and Horizon 2020. The heavily oversubscribed student programme will receive an additional €20 million and Horizon will receive €80 million, which will fund research into technologies that will help address the climate emergency. Mr President, this investment budget reflects the truth that our collective endeavours as a union enable us to achieve more than any member state in or out of the union would achieve alone. I thank the House for its indulgence and recommend your support.
Grazie. La votazione.
Thank you very much. The roll call vote is open. Have you all voted? The vote is closed. That is carried. And now the Mureşan report on mobilisation of the European Union Solidarity Fund. A single vote by roll call, and the vote is open. Has everyone voted? The vote is closed. That is carried. And the Howarth report on DAB 3, Draft Amendment Budget 3, single vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed.
Approvato.
That's approved. And the Juncker report, the Johnsa report, mobilisation of the EGAF, single vote by roll call. The vote is open. Johnsa. Has everyone voted? The vote is closed. That is carried. And now the proposal for motion for a resolution on the UK's withdrawal from the EU. Paragraph 4 in 2 parts. Part 1 by show of hands. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? Carried. And second part by roll call, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. That is carried. Paragraph 12 in two parts. Part 1 by roll call, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. That's carried. And part 2 by show of hands. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Paragraph 14, two parts. Part 1, those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. And part 2, those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Paragraph 17. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. And paragraph 20. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital A, two parts. Part 1. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Part 2. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital D, two parts. Part 1. In favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Part 2. In favour. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital K, original text. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Recital N. Those in favour. Those against. Abstentions. Carried. Now the vote on the motion for resolution as a whole by roll call, and the vote is open. The vote is closed.
Approvato.
That is carried by a large majority.
Allora, in attesa delle dichiarazioni.
So, the sitting is suspended, and shortly we will have the explanations of vote.